This girl, Marel, was thinking about how sometimes life just totally goes off script. You know, in those moments, Marel tried so hard to keep it together, but honestly, she was at the point where it felt better to just give up. Luckily, she had someone who was always in her corner. Darcy was just worried that Marel would regret her decision later. Darcy promised Marel he'd stick by her whether she decided to run for it or stay and fight, but he had to ask if she was for real about her choice. Marel reminded Darcy that he was the one who told her this was even an option. Darcy just smiled and said he only wanted Marel to be happy, which is why he was so stressed. Then he held his hand out to her. Marel looked at Darcy, hesitating, trying to figure out if bailing on everything would actually make her happy. She thought about all the people who made her feel so completely broken and exhausted. For a while, Marel tried to stick it out for them, tried to change, but it all ended up being for nothing. Marel figured she had nothing left to lose, so she smiled, put her hand in Darcy's and said that she was 100% sure about doing this for herself. Marel finally realized the person who needed her the most wasn't someone else, it was her. It all kicked off when this one girl woke up inside her favorite book, but as the super nasty villain, which meant her first move, had to be apologizing to Leuan, who Marel had been awful to. It seemed like that could fix everything, especially since Leuan forgave Marel right away. Leuan was just a really kind person. She said she was so happy Marel was being real with her and even asked her to be friends. Marel was so grateful for Leuan's kindness and friendship, but not everyone else was as cool as Leuan. The rumors about Marel's bad reputation had already spread everywhere. Even little kids were making fun of her, saying she tried to steal the prince from Leuan. Marel's maid got super defensive about the teasing, but Marel herself played it cool. Marel knew she wasn't the girl they were all hating on. She figured she could totally change their minds if she just did more good things, especially since she knew exactly what was going to happen next. Marel thought that if she could just prove she'd changed, she could completely flip the entire plot of the story. Marel was all in on this when she tried to get Leuan and the prince off the balcony, because she knew someone was about to try and take Leuan out. She couldn't convince them to leave, and the arrow ended up hitting Marel instead, which weirdly felt like a win. Marel thought at least she'd managed to save Leuan, but her hopes got crushed the second she heard what people were saying about it. High society just couldn't accept that the person they'd labeled a villain could ever change. They didn't believe that Marel could have actually saved Leuan. Some thought she did it for attention, while others were convinced she set up the whole thing herself. Some even thought it was ironic that Marel got hit while trying to take Leuan's spot next to the prince. Marel tried her absolute best, but anything she did involving Leuan was always twisted, even if she was just helping the girl with her coat. People accused her of being jealous of Leuan's style, or being secretly sarcastic. The world literally revolved around Leuan. She was the main character. And even though Leuan was nice to Marel, the people around them weren't about to follow her lead. Prince Ryan and the Knight Commander Kaiser, who had a secret crush on Leuan, were always trying to protect the innocent girl from evil Marel. No matter how hard Marel tried or what she did, everyone still hated her, and she was always the one who got blamed. When Marel was just thinking about how tired she was of all the drama, Leuan invited her for a walk. Marel just wanted some alone time, but she couldn't say no to Leuan, who was now chattering about how Marel had been looking so tired and down lately. Leuan said that's why she figured Marel needed to get out for some fresh air. Marel thanked her for being thoughtful and didn't mention that she would have much rather stayed in her room. Marel guessed she was still holding on to a little bit of hope that things would get better. Just then, Leuan leaned over the water, having spotted something in the pond. Leuan lost her balance and totally fell in. Marel freaked out because the girl couldn't swim, so she jumped right in after her. Marel dove into the water and helped Leuan get back to the shore. A panicked Kaiser ran over to them and started checking on Leuan like crazy. Leuan promised Kaiser she was fine and that Marel had saved her, but that just triggered an insanely bad reaction from him. Kaiser was absolutely positive that Marel had planned for Leuan to fall in the water. Without even trying to figure out what happened or listening to Leuan, Kaiser dragged a dripping wet Marel over to Ryan. Before Marel could get a single word out, Kaiser told Ryan that Marel had hugged Leuan, and then she fell into the water. Ryan didn't listen to Marel either. He said Leuan should have never let Marel get so close. Ryan then asked if Marel actually thought that getting rid of Leuan would give her a chance with him. Marel was just thinking, why does nobody ever believe me? While Ryan kept putting her down and telling her what an awful person she was. Ryan even said that if a woman isn't loved, it's her own fault. Blame. And then he just went off saying he'd put up with Marel for way too long and was officially at his limit. Marel's head dropped. She knew she couldn't take it anymore because it felt like no matter what she did, it always ended up like this. Tears were streaming down Marel's face, but she tried to power through it, saying she was done doing anything for Leuan, done seeing her, and done with parties. She was just going to lock herself away at home and pay for whatever she'd done wrong. Ryan tried to stop Marel, but she just ran out of the room, not wanting to hear another word against her anymore. Ryan just thought great Marel was always so extra. Marel figured everyone would think she was a coward for running, but right then, she didn't give a crap. She raced up to her carriage, where her maid was waiting, who instantly got worried seeing that Marel was totally drenched. Marel snatched the towel and said she was so mad at Ryan that she had promised him she'd never leave her house again. The maid was like, "And how exactly are you going to pull that off?" Marel just said that since she was the daughter of a rich and noble family, she could totally afford to just become a hermit and blow through cash. And honestly, it turned out to be the best decision Marel had ever made. Lying back on her bed, totally relaxed, Marel thought she was so over trying to change the plot. She was seriously just going to live a chill life with her cat. Everyone else's drama could stay over there. At least that's what Marel was trying to convince herself. She was just peacefully sipping some tea. No Ryan around who never even tried to hear her out, and no Leuan who was totally clueless about the awkward vibes she created. Sitting there, Marel wondered why on earth she had put up with all of that for so long. The only thing on her mind now was figuring out how not to die of boredom while stuck at home. Marel knew that unlike her old world, this place had zero internet phones or computers, but thinking about them sparked a genius idea. Marel whipped around to her maid Lei to help her bring it to life. Marel knew she couldn't just whip up electronics here, but this world had magic, so she just needed a merchant who dealt in enchanted items. Basically, you made them by processing these things called arcanium stones. Carriages that drove themselves, and even voice recorders were just a few of the cool enchanted things you could get. You just had to give some arcanium stones to a sorcerer, and they could literally create anything, but the technology was super underdeveloped because the stones were crazy expensive. It all depended on the sorcerer's skill level, and everyone was weirdly prejudiced about it. The magicians were really not into the idea that someone could use magic through some gadget without them having to be there. On top of that, normal people thought these things were dangerous mostly because the emperor and the nobles were all trashing enchanted objects and spreading a bunch of lies. Marel just couldn't wrap her head around how someone could get cursed by a simple voice recorder, and she was already planning to boost her family's fortune by investing in enchanted items. Marel knew that in the original story, Leuan and Ryan would be riding around in an enchanted carriage soon, which would make demand for enchanted stuff go through the roof. Later on, the imperial family, which was basically run by wizards, would make a fortune from enchanted items, and then use that same tech to control other wizards. Eventually, the really powerful magicians caved for the cash and started cranking out more enchanted devices. Marel was pretty sure she had enough time to get ahead of it all. While Marel was trying to remember exactly how the story was supposed to go next, a total stranger suddenly appeared right in front of her. The guy literally materialized out of nowhere. She'd been expecting a merchant, but she wasn't sure how to react to this kind of grand entrance. The merchant just smiled, said hello, and sat down right in front of Marel, who was thinking that teleporting like that must take some major sorcerer skills. And even though Marel got that she had no clue why this guy was acting so chill around her, any irritation she felt, though, completely evaporated the second the guy pulled off his hood. Marel was definitely not prepared to see someone that ridiculously good-looking sitting across from her. The guy introduced himself as Darcy, a merchant magician, but Marel was floored that a guy this hot was in the story, and she had no idea. Darcy, she thought, might actually be even more handsome than Ryan. He was like a beautiful flower with a seriously tempting vibe, but she got the feeling that he was ready to strike with his poison at any moment. Marel, totally losing her filter, muttered that Darcy was way too handsome to just be some random extra. Darcy, overhearing her, said he was just a merchant, and asked what she meant by extras. Marel flinched, realizing he'd thrown her off so much that she'd just blurted out something she shouldn't have. Trying to get it together, Marel asked if Darcy had any idea who he was talking to, since he was still being way too casual. But as it turned out, Darcy was perfectly aware of who he'd come to see. The silence at the table got super awkward, and Marel figured his whole vibe definitely wasn't because he was clueless. Darcy then explained that he absolutely hated talking all formally to nobles and asked Marel to just roll with it. Darcy said he didn't get why people were so hung up on social status when everyone's basically the same. Marel thought that his whole vibe really worked for him, and she was actually stoked to meet a guy here with some modern ideas. The whole class system drove Marel crazy, so she told Darcy he could totally talk to her, like with zero restrictions. After that, Mara was like, "Okay, how did you even get in here?" And the guy explained he teleported using some enchanted thingy he made himself, which totally blew Mara's mind. Like she knew that took some serious skill. Darcy was legit talented, no doubt. So Mara just cut to the chase and said there was some stuff she needed from him. Darcy asked how much she was willing to drop on this, and Mara said 5 billion gold pieces should get things rolling. Darcy just smirked, wondering what in the world a high society girl, the one and only daughter of the Mayoress of Atoll, could possibly want. The side-eye he was giving her made total sense, considering how all the rich folks looked down on enchanted stuff. Mara figured this was all for her ticket to a happy life, far away from this whole scene. So she just smiled and slid a blueprint over to Darcy for a device that could record and play back videos. Her first big project for her new solo life was a movie theater, but Mara had way bigger plans than that, so after a few minutes, she showed him a bunch of other blueprints, and then he bounced. Everything felt dark and creepy for Darcy. The only sound was the guard's footsteps echoing. He'd been locked up in that castle for 10 freaking years, although they'd let him out for walks sometimes, probably just to mess with his head about his guilt. It was such a lame move, but hey, that's how Darcy found out Mara was looking for a dealer in enchanted gear. The guards were always so paranoid about him leaving his room, but in the end they were totally clueless when he dipped. The guy found that pretty ironic. Darcy figured that, in this whole rundown castle, his room was the only place that actually felt like his. Tugging off his tie and shirt, Darcy thought about how Mara was nothing like he'd expected. He figured he'd have to get all threatening with her, but she actually had him intrigued. It was still kinda hard to believe a noble girl was actually into enchanted stuff, but Mara totally was, and on top of that she needed it, to make her self-imposed house arrest a little more cozy. Darcy found that super weird, because he was like desperately trying to break asterisk out asterisk of his cage. In reality, he'd gotten everything he needed from Morrow. He had the Arcanium now. All that was left was to run some tests. Darcy checked himself out in the mirror, thinking that the way people freaked out over his mismatched eyes could actually be useful. He casually plopped down on the sofa and lit a smoke. A guard walked in and noted that Darcy had been in the bath for way longer than usual. Darcy was just like, "Dude, you get it right. When you're being watched 24/7, you kinda need some alone time to chill." The guard got all awkward and bounced while Darcy was thinking the teleportation went pretty smoothly this time, but there was no way he could have ported to another country from this place. Darcy pulled out the blueprint for the recording gadget Morrow gave him. He smirked, thinking the device was actually super simple but also like totally game-changing. He had a feeling things with Morrow were not going to be boring. Morrow was just chilling on her bed when Letty came in and said she'd cleared out the next room and also brought in those heavy curtains just like Morrow asked. Morrow thanked her, thinking how stoked she was that she'd made that deal with Darcy. Darcy was kind of weird though. He was super insistent that they only meet one-on-one, warning her that he'd bail on the whole deal otherwise. Morrow had set everything up so Darcy could build the gadget she needed, but now she had to give her theater crew a heads up. Morrow figured she probably couldn't edit film footage or anything, so movies were out, but she could totally record plays and operas. Morrow thought that she could probably just buy the whole acting troupe easy, but that would totally start a bunch of rumors, and that was the last thing she wanted. Anyway, she needed to chat with the actors, so she called for Letty. Morrow told Letty to get the whole opera crew and staff together in the garden. Letty was like, okay, but she wasn't thrilled about it. She had no idea what Morrow was up to, but preferred not to start anything. Morrow was thinking maybe she could hire someone to write a script to make the whole thing feel more like a drama. Her brainstorming got cut short by some annoying news. Leuan had decided to send her a letter. Leuan wanted to visit, saying she was worried since they hadn't seen each other in forever. Morrow just tiredly rubbed her face. Leuan never stopped to think about what kind of rumors would start flying around about Morrow. Morrow was thinking like she and Leuan were never even that close to begin with. The real problem was Morrow just didn't want to see Leuan. Period. Leuan was nice and all, but every time they hung out, everyone, including the so-called main characters of this story, started blaming Morrow for everything. Morrow was always stuck in Leuan's shadow and constantly asked herself what she did wrong this time, and why everyone was hating on her now. Before, Morrow used to think the problem was her, but now that she'd just given up on all that, she felt truly free. Still, she probably had to meet with Leuan to just get it over with once and for all. There was no way Morrow was meeting her alone, though, so she decided she'd invite Ryan and Kaiser too. Thoughts about Leuan and how clueless she was totally bugged Morrow, but she had a meeting with Darcy coming up so she could push it out of her mind at least for a bit. Darcy showed up right on schedule and Morrow was waiting with the check and some cakes. Okay, so Darcy looked totally ticked off for a second. He plopped down on the couch and Marel was like, "Why is this dude so mad all of a sudden?" But then just as fast, that familiar smile was back. It spread across his face, but Morrow couldn't shake the feeling that for a moment he was actually kinda scary. Anyway, Morrow pointed out it had been 2 weeks since they last met and asked how their project was coming along. Darcy shot back that he had a question for her, asking why Marel even needed all this stuff, cause he was getting the vibe she was planning to never leave her house again. Marel replied that he was totally right. She wasn't leaving the house ever again. Morrow figured the gossip would start spreading soon enough anyway, and Darcy looked legit surprised. He asked why on earth she would make a decision like that. Marel gave him a long, hard look. She had no clue how to explain it, mostly because she didn't really trust this guy yet. Guys like him spread rumors like wildfire. Marel tried to dodge the question, saying that every family has its drama, and hers was no different. Morrow added that at the end of the day, she was just doing what her dad wanted. Morrow started to say something else, but stopped when she saw the ice-cold look on Darcy's face. He seemed totally frozen, like he wasn't even hearing what Marel was saying. It felt to Morrow like Darcy was just waiting for her to spill the real tea. With a sigh, Morrow figured it couldn't hurt to let him in a little, and said she was just completely burnt out on people. That seemed to throw Darcy for a loop, since he was so sick of being trapped in the castle. Darcy's whole plan was to eventually just leave the country and forget about getting revenge, but Morrow was slowly changing something in him. Morrow said her plan was to literally just rot in her room forever, and that sounded like pure bliss to her. Darcy got all annoyed and asked if she even had a clue what being locked up actually meant. Morrow just looked at Darcy totally confused. His reaction was so weird, but she told him she knew exactly what it meant to be locked up. Morrow wasn't about to get stuck on it, so she changed the subject and asked about the gadget Darcy was supposed to be making. Darcy thought that at first he figured Morrow just had really weird taste, but her whole vibe was clearly way more than that. The silence was getting so awkward. Morrow asked if maybe she hadn't given him enough time. He promised her that wasn't the issue, and said he wanted to change their contract. He wanted to know more about what her idea of being isolated was really all about. Morrow was surprised Darcy was even interested, but then he explained that he'd spent a ton of time in isolation himself. After that, Darcy told her he'd actually finished everything Morrow had asked for. He bragged that he was pretty good at his job, and then asked Morrow to hold out her hand. So Morrow held out her hand, and he placed the gadget she'd been waiting for right in her palm. It looked a lot like a modern-day camera. Darcy leaned in way too close to Morrow, and she felt super awkward, but a part of her really wanted to keep working with this guy. Darcy got this smug look and said that Marel would have a hard time finding anyone with his skills. And that's exactly why. Marel agreed to show Darcy her master plan for spending all her time alone. As they walked through the halls of the estate, Darcy was gloomily thinking about how he'd be leaving this place soon. Leaving the palace and the emperor who was just using him. Darcy figured if he'd actually gone for the throne, maybe people would have loved him like they love Ryan, but he had zero desire to waste his life on something like that. Darcy thought if he could just survive until his birthday, he'd finally be free. He could go somewhere far, far away, live how he wanted, and try to make up for all the bad things he'd done. But until then, he might as well kill time by trying to figure out this girl who wanted the total opposite. Morrow led Darcy into a pretty empty room she called her theater room. Morrow admitted sheepishly that it wasn't much to look at yet, and Darcy was like, "Yeah, it looks pretty empty." He honestly had no idea why Marel brought him in here, but then she placed the enchanted gadget on the table and switched it on. A blank screen lit up on the opposite wall, just like a projector. Morrow was so psyched that Darcy had actually managed to pull off what she had asked for, but he just said it was a piece of cake. Darcy wondered what in the world Morrow planned to do in this room by herself. Marel told him she usually just chills on her bed and listens to music, but now she was going to use the magic device to record plays and watch them in here. Oh, and she also reads and eats here. This all sounded totally insane to Darcy, and he just couldn't believe that this was seriously all Morrow wanted. He asked why she didn't just go for a walk outside or something, and Marel just said she liked being alone. Darcy still looked skeptical, so Marel told him to lie down on the couch and then walked over to the window. Darcy thought, whatever she's planning, it's not going to work on me. He knew what being alone was really like, and the thought of it made him sick. Marel said her favorite time was anywhere between midnight and dawn. Then Morrow pulled the heavy curtains closed, making the room super dim. She quietly went over to the gramophone and turned it on. Music started playing in the room. After like 2 minutes, Darcy closed his eyes, surprised by how calm he suddenly felt. Marel, who was already chilling on the bed, said that now all they had to do was lie there and listen to the music. Darcy, still on the couch, sat up and asked like he was offended, "Is this seriously it? This is all you want?" He ran a hand over his neck, completely baffled. Was like, "This is not what I was picturing." Marel went quiet for a sec, and Darcy literally thought she'd passed out, but then Marel finally said that sometimes she just needs her own space. Marel's eyes fluttered open, and she admitted that sometimes she just has to hit pause when she's totally drained. Darcy gave her this small smile, like he kinda got where she was coming from. Darcy asked, "So why are you so wiped out? You grew up with like everything." Marel just replied that she was still a person, you know? She explained that her whole deal with people never ever went the way she wanted it to, so she just had to unplug from all of it sometimes. Darcy told her the reason she's so exhausted is because she's way too caught up in what everyone else thinks of her, and that she seriously just needed to let it go. Marel gave this awkward little smile and was like, "Okay, I'll try to work on that from now on." Then Darcy switched it up and asked what cool things she wanted from him next. She told him she needed something to make the screen like blow up and cover the whole wall. Marel got super hyped, saying she wanted the entire wall to just be one giant screen. Darcy couldn't help but notice that Marel's whole expression just completely flipped, and she looked so much more alive. Darcy was like, "All right then, see you in 2 weeks," and bounced, but he was thinking he could seriously watch Marel for like ever. But it wasn't all good vibes on Marel's schedule, which is why her mood suddenly took a nosedive. The very people who made her want to be a total shut-in were about to show up at her place. And yep, there was Lean's super cheerful voice, and then she popped into view with Ryan and Kaiser right beside her. Lean was all smiles, saying it took them a minute to get over to Marel's. Marel just forced a smile and thanked them for coming, thinking to herself that it was finally time to end this whole toxic situation with Lean. Marel tried to play nice, so she led the three of them into the living room and even poured everyone some tea. Lean went on and on about how she was so worried that Marel wasn't leaving the house. Marel tried to play it cool, saying she was just feeling a little under the weather, but Lean immediately started freaking out for her while Ryan and Kaiser just shot Marel these super nasty looks. Marel looked over at Lean, feeling kind of bad about it. She knew that in a way she was about to crush this girl. Marel could tell Lean was genuinely worried. She was a total sweetheart and could get along with literally everyone. And that was exactly why Marel had really wanted to believe they could actually be friends. Lean wanted that too, but Marel put her cup down on the table and said she only asked them all to come over so she could tell them she was done hanging out with Lean. Leuan, totally confused, asked what was going on. Marel said she realized that being friends with Leuan the way things were was just all wrong, so now she was just going to stay locked away and think about all her mistakes. Leuan asked what Marel even thought she did wrong and then rushed to tell her that it wasn't her fault. Marel gave Ryan and Kaiser a dark look, thinking, yup, nothing's changed. Marel even wondered if Leuan was really that clueless and couldn't see how much heat Marel was getting because of her. Marel figured Leuan wasn't just dodging all the bad vibes herself. Leuan, who always had Ryan and Kaiser acting as her bodyguards, never had to step in and deal with any drama. Marel thought it's not like that's a crime or anything, but it was always Marel taking the hits, so it was time to just pull the plug. After that, Marel told Leuan not to call her by her nickname anymore. Kaiser immediately got pissed off because it sounded to him like Marel was bossing Leuan around. Marel answered super chill that she wasn't trying to order anyone around, she was just setting some boundaries. Marel said that nobody would be seeing her at any parties or even near Leuan ever again. Kaiser wasn't buying it. Marel noticed that unlike Kaiser, Ryan was being creepily quiet. Kaiser got distracted when Leuan ran out of the room, totally crying, throwing one last guilt trip at Marel I thought we were friends. Marel thought that Ryan should have been the one chasing after Leuan, not just Kaiser. He just silently stared at her and was in no rush to catch up to anyone. After a few seconds of silence, Ryan said with total confidence that people don't just change that easily. Marel calmly said she'd already promised to stay home back when Ryan told her she wasn't allowed to do anything anyway. Marel thought that if things went according to the script, most of Leuan's problems were supposed to be her fault. But if they mess with the plot, Ryan would get more time with Leuan. Now it was all on him, and whether he could avoid drama with his girl, even with his intense personality. Marel smirked and said she really hoped Ryan was just as miserable as she'd been, and then she decided to just ditch the prince. The super hard and nasty part was finally over. Now Marel was getting ready to meet the actors. Letty, who was helping Marel get ready, told her she looked absolutely amazing. Marel stood up and super casually told Letty she had a feeling there was a rat in the house. Marel said that Ryan was reacting way too fast to everything she did, and asked Letty to handle it. The maid was on it. After that, Marel went to the theater room where the cast had already gathered. There was this low buzz of chatter in the room, but it died down the second the door opened. Marel said hi to everyone and thanked them for showing up. A short guy came up to her and introduced himself as Pa, the crew's writer. Marel said with a smile that she'd heard great things about Pa and knew he was totally legit. After that, Marel looked over at the stage. The actors looked pretty freaked out, like they'd obviously heard the rumors about her, but since they already showed up, they might as well get over it. Marel figured she was paying them 10 times the going rate, so they had zero reason to complain, but just then she heard them whispering that she was going to make them do some weird stuff. So Morrow decided to just be real, whipped out the enchanted device and announced she'd gathered everyone because she was going to record their plays. The actors were totally clueless about what Morrow was planning, so the vibe got even more tense. IRO, the troupe's lead actor, finally worked up the nerve to ask Morrow what exactly she was going to do with them. IRO was a total hottie. He had the main role in the play and was super popular with all the young ladies. But Morrow's heart was already taken by Darcy's perfect looks. Morrow said it would be way easier if she just showed them what she was planning. IRO stood in front of the device, just staring at the lens, completely confused and not getting what he was supposed to do. Marel explained that IRO could just try saying something, and a few other actors did the same. Marel smiled while she got the device ready for playback, and behind her you could hear everyone whispering and getting curious. The device switched on, and what the actors saw totally blew their minds. They were watching what had just happened, like they could see themselves from the outside. Marel explained that she had invented the device herself and promised it was 100% safe. But if anyone was doubting her enchanted gadgets, then they were doubting her too. Marel had to lay it all out since people were still freaked out by enchanted devices, but that clearly wasn't the case for these actors anymore. The actors were all hyped up talking about what they saw on the screen. They weren't scared at all about being recorded by some strange gadget. Marel asked with a smile if everyone was cool with continuing to record. Nobody said no, and the whole mood in the theater warmed up instantly. Pal ran up to Morrow and said he wanted to ask her a question before they started the play. The problem was, the play they were supposed to do was about a love story between a girl and a magician. Pal wasn't sure if they could perform this for Morrow because the aristocrats had a major thing against magicians. The magicians were super talented, but in their chase for power, their greed made them cross the imperial family. Because of that, the magicians started getting seriously oppressed. Some had to serve the emperor, while others had to go into hiding. Morrow knew that the mages' rebellions had been crushed a bunch of times, even leading to a massive battle. That battle was won by Ryan, who, was great with a sword, but totally couldn't have done it without the enchanted items that were made for him by those same magicians who served the emperor. Morrow thought that was pretty ironic. Pal asked Morrow if he should change the script since characters like that might give the lady some major drama. Morrow replied that she had zero issues with mages, so Pal didn't have to change a thing. After that, Marel handed Pal a huge folder, explaining it was full of her ideas for future plays that he should totally use. The play started. Morrow was completely into the love story of a magician and an ordinary girl, A whole story of love and betrayal happening on stage, and the actors were pouring their hearts into it. Marel was just fascinated by the scene playing out so intensely in front of her. When the play ended, Maro jumped to her feet, giving a standing ovation with tears in her eyes. Maro was so stoked to have recorded the performance. When IRO walked up to her, he asked if Maro would let the actors watch a recording of the play. Maro didn't mind, but she was curious why they needed it. IRO explained that they thought it was a good chance to look at their own acting from the outside and learn from it. The actors were actually talking about all the technical stuff in their performance while they watched the playback. Maro thought this was literally the best way to convince people that enchanted devices weren't evil. After watching, Pal asked if they could maybe record the next play later. The guy knew that the device was crazy expensive, but hoped Maro would meet them halfway. Maro knew that enchanted items were ridiculously expensive, so she understood why Pal was so shy about asking for a simple favor. Maro thought about how she didn't really owe the actors or anyone anything. Maro had tried to help people out so many times before, but instead of thanks, she just got shade. But still, that wasn't the actors' fault. So after thinking for a second, Maro said that the actors could watch the recordings anytime they wanted. Not only that, Maro gave the actors the device, saying she could just make another one, and when they offered to pay her, she told them to pay her back with amazing acting. Marel had high hopes that this theater group would blow up because they really put their heart and soul into their work. IRO just stared at Maro, totally starstruck. At one point, he even blushed. IRO knelt in front of Maro, asking how he could ever repay her for everything she'd done for them. Maro was totally speechless. She was thinking that, as expected, IRO's acting was seriously incredible. Marel told him his performance was beyond praise. Sharing feelings was free, so all that was needed from IRO was to keep up the great work. IRO kissed Maro's hand, saying he really hoped she would visit them often, and then he left, leaving Maro just standing there stunned. At a pub hanging with his friends, IRO was saying how the rumors about Maro were complete nonsense. Someone asked IRO why he even agreed to see Marel in the first place, and he explained that after he turned down a noblewoman's offer to be her boy toy, things on stage hadn't been going so great for him. IRO said that he's usually so grossed out by aristocratic women because they just want to own you, seeing lead actors as just playthings, but Maro was totally different. Ledro explained Maro was the first noble lady who was into the acting, not just his looks. Ledro said Maro looked at him without being thirsty or wanting something from him. Ledro's buddy just laughed, saying it sounded like Ledro was crushing on Maro. Ledro gave it some serious thought. He really admired her, and he just couldn't get her out of his head. Another friend brought up the rumor that actors were leaving Maro's house with some serious skill upgrades. He asked Ledro if he was getting some kind of special training at Maro's place, but the guy stayed quiet. Ledro couldn't spill the tea on that one. All the actors had to sign a super strict non-disclosure agreement about the recording gadget. So far, everything was going great for Maro. She'd managed to record 3 whole plays, and her new script was coming along awesome. Maro was just glad she had more and more excuses to be a homebody. With Letty standing right there, Maro asked if she'd managed to get any info from Ryan about the spy in the house. Letty kinda stalled, but said she had a little something. And then she handed Maro an envelope from Ledro. Maro stared at the envelope, super confused, as Letty basically bolted. Maro was like, what could he possibly need to write that he couldn't just say to my face? But she didn't even have time to open it before Darcy popped up right in front of her. Maro smiled, pointing out that Darcy was on time as always, and he shot back that he was big on being punctual. Then Darcy asked with a smirk what kind of envelope she was trying to hide. Maro got all flustered and said it was just a letter from one of the actors. And then she told Darcy that she'd let the actors borrow the recording device. Maro added with a smile that everyone thinks his invention is like amazing. Darcy just muttered that it was so not good, because he'd be in major trouble if anyone found out about his secret skills. Maro didn't catch what Darcy mumbled, and asked what he was talking about, but Darcy just brushed it off. After that, Darcy gave Maro a new gadget that was supposed to make the screen bigger. Maro just stared at Darcy, totally fascinated, and couldn't figure out why he wasn't even mentioned in the original book's plot. Maro had a feeling Darcy had to be connected to the main characters somehow. The only thing Maro could think of was that maybe Darcy died before the events of the book even started. That thought totally freaked her out, so she quickly told herself that Darcy was just a merchant, and that's why he wasn't in the story. Maro said she wanted to order another recording device and just give the first one to the actors. But in that moment, the vibe from Darcy got super cold. He asked her why she'd need it. Darcy said Maro should be looking out for herself first. Maro shot back that it was her choice whether she wanted to help the actors or not. Darcy said he just wanted to stop her from doing something dumb and getting hurt. Maro's face got all hot. Hearing that from a guy was a total surprise. Maro said she'd be fine, especially since she wasn't expecting anything back from the actors anyway. Darcy grabbed Maro's hand and said that even though she says she expects nothing in return, there's a rumor going around that she's started seeing Ledro. Maro was stunned and was like, why would I do that? And Darcy just said he obviously had no idea. Maro explained she barely even sees the actors since she only shows up at the very end of rehearsal. Darcy got this satisfied little smile and said he must have gotten some bad info. Morrow confirmed it was just a misunderstanding, but she was surprised at herself for blushing for literally no reason. Darcy just looked at Morrow with a quiet smile. He was definitely getting a kick out of her reaction. Darcy asked if Morrow needed any other gadgets while he was free to work on them, because he wouldn't be able to come by for a while. Morrow asked if it was because his business was taking off, and the guy just said yeah, something like that. Morrow told him that for her next project she wanted a device that could basically capture a moment in time. Darcy knew right away what she was talking about. The girl was thinking she was ready to shower this guy with arcanium stones. Darcy then asked if Morrow was curious about when he planned on coming back. Morrow did as she was told and asked him about it, but all she got back was that he didn't really know for sure. Morrow was a little thrown, like why would he even bring it up if he didn't have an answer? Then the guy suggested they head to her theater room together. Seeing Morrow's confused look, Darcy explained that he wanted to watch the play with her. Once they were in the room, Darcy said he needed to check if the recording gadget was working right. As Morrow turned it on, she couldn't help but think that she wasn't going to see Darcy for a while. She knew almost nothing about him, but Darcy really didn't seem like some regular merchant. Morrow was super curious about why he was so secretive. She wondered if it was because Darcy was actually a mage. Morrow figured that it shouldn't really be her problem since she'd promised herself to stay out of other people's business. Looking at Darcy, who was just reading a book, Morrow thought that all she really wanted was some peace. Darcy looked up at Morrow. She totally blushed from his sudden stare. Darcy asked Morrow if she was into the romance novels he'd found in her library. He commented that it was kind of weird considering Morrow couldn't stand people. The girl said she liked stories where people go from being total strangers to not being able to live without each other. Darcy figured that in that case, she must had a super active imagination. Morrow asked why Darcy's vibe suddenly got so harsh, and he just said that was part of his charm. Morrow just sank onto the sofa and asked Darcy if he had ever actually been in love. Darcy's whole expression froze for a second, a total red flag that Morrow was in dangerous territory before he said he'd never had the chance. Morrow then asked where Darcy lived, figuring there had to be a huge crowd of fangirls following him around. He just replied that he wasn't really a people person. Darcy then said that technically speaking his life was pretty similar to a regular slave's. Darcy said he pretty much spent all his time in his room and almost never went out. Then he got right up in Morrow's space and admitted he was kind of rude to her sometimes, because she was a major reminder of his own life. Darcy said that's just how things were for him, but it was all good. He then said he could let it all go now, and Morrow knew he was about to bounce. Darcy didn't give Morrow a heads up about it since he didn't see the point. Morrow had the sinking feeling that for real the next time she saw Darcy would be the last. Darcy noticed Morrow was zoning out and suggested they watch a play together. Morrow watched spellbound even though it was her second time, just happy the screen was massive now. Morrow couldn't help but wonder if Darcy was even into this play, or if he was totally bored. Darcy caught her staring and asked her what was up. Morrow just said that he seemed super focused, which was new. The guy said that spells were just as tricky as sword fights, and that he was way more into fast-paced battles. Morrow said it seriously sounded like Darcy had a ton of fighting experience. She thought it was super possible that this would be the last time she'd see him, because he'd probably have to jump into some kind of battle. Morrow's mind was racing. She had to come up with something to keep Darcy safe, and the idea of a firearm just popped into her head. Morrow quickly sketched something out and asked Darcy if he could make something like it. When it was time for Darcy to go, he said the play wasn't half bad, and her idea for the new gadget was pretty sick. Darcy said the new device kinda reminded him of a handheld cannon, and then told Morrow she should read the letter Leroux gave her. Morrow had totally spaced on that letter, but Darcy said he had a weird feeling about it, so she should read it out loud while he was there. Darcy said if Morrow read the letter with him there, he'd make the recording device for free, but she shot back that she had more than enough money. Darcy got a little dark, and said he'd only just realized the letter was personally from Morrow. Morrow told him he shouldn't say stuff like that, because someone might get the wrong idea and think he was jealous because he liked her. Darcy said he was sorry she saw it that way, and she was like, "No, I'm talking about other people." Darcy then wondered out loud if that was what Morrow secretly wanted. Morrow was completely shook, but Darcy kept going, saying he knew he was her type. Morrow asked how he could possibly think that, and the guy explained that her eyes totally gave her away. Darcy got super close to Morrow and asked if she wanted him to be into her. The girl immediately said no. Morrow shoved Darcy away. He asked why she was suddenly backing off, and she explained that she had a hard time believing Darcy was a one-woman kind of guy. Darcy said he couldn't really argue with her on that because love seemed like a super messy thing to him. She pointed out that Darcy had never even been in love. He explained that he could totally figure things out just by watching other people. Darcy said it was always the same story with people all over each other holding hands. At first they're so busy making out they don't even see what's happening around them. Darcy said that if he had to, he could totally fake it, but he wasn't convinced it was true love. Then Darcy said thoughtfully that he could tell his rejection was a challenge for Morrow. He pulled Morrow close and said that if he wants something, he always gets it, and then he asked if Morrow wanted him to love her. Morrow just stared at Darcy, totally confused, Like, was he being for real? Morrow knew that Darcy was about to peace out of her life for good, so she didn't want to get her hopes up. Morrow stalled, not knowing what to say, but Darcy suddenly told her to just forget it. Darcy said that Morrow didn't have to answer if she wasn't feeling it. Then he gave a little wave, said, "See you in 2 weeks," and was gone. Morrow thought Darcy was a completely impossible guy who just did whatever he wanted. Morrow's thoughts went back to how she still couldn't figure out why Darcy wasn't even in the original story. Something about the original plot felt super off to Morrow. Emperor Kaiser was always in some battle with the mages. Everyone was in awe of how he'd just charge in no matter how dangerous it was. Ryan, though, only joined the army when things got really bad. Morrow thought the timing of Ryan's fights versus Emperor Kaiser's was totally out of sync. Ryan never fought when the Emperor did, even though it wasn't like Ryan couldn't handle himself back then, and the Emperor wasn't the type to coddle his son. It was more like they were deliberately avoiding fighting on the same team. Morrow knew it might have nothing to do with Darcy, but it could be a clue. She let out a huge sigh and thought about how she'd still managed to catch feelings for Darcy. Meanwhile, at the palace, Emperor Kaiser told Ryan that he was about to head out on a mage hunt for 2 weeks. The Emperor basically told Ryan to hold down the fort while he was gone. Ryan was like, okay, but he was thinking about how his dad never looped him in on any of the kingdom's real problems. The Emperor then randomly said that after this hunt, he was planning to give Castle Siren to Ryan and also throw a coronation ceremony like ASAP. The news totally threw Ryan, not because of the whole king thing, but because it was at Siren Castle, a place he was banned from. Siren Castle was the spot where Emperor K locked up and did some seriously messed up stuff to mages. Ryan had no clue why his dad would suddenly trust him with a place like that. He figured maybe whatever Twisted Games case was playing in there had finally wrapped up, but he kept that thought to himself and just thanked the Emperor for the vote of confidence. Then Emperor Kai switched gears and asked about the deal with the daughter of the Hual family. He'd heard some gossip that the girl was basically a hermit in her own mansion. Kais pointed out that the Morrow family had 2 whole arcanium mines, which made marrying into their family a super smart move for Ryan. Ryan tried to argue that they already had plenty of arcanium, but the Emperor just shut him down, saying they needed more. He also made it clear he expected Ryan to do whatever it took for the Imperial family. So Emperor Kais basically ordered Ryan to get engaged tomorrow, period. The Emperor was a total hard-ass, but he had this major soft spot for his lover Kayan Germain. He'd secretly moved the silver-haired woman in right after the Empress died. For a while, things were actually chill at the palace, and they were both super happy. But then his beloved Germain died, and that's when the messed up punishments and random killing sprees started happening way more often, and the Emperor just completely lost it. As Ryan walked down the hall, he was thinking there was no way in hell he was going through with this engagement tomorrow. He basically had 2 options. He could either prove to his dad that marrying Leuan was a way better deal, or convince him that Morrow had some major skeletons in her closet. Ryan had heard whispers that Morrow already had a boyfriend, and he decided to dig a little deeper into that rumor. Ryan kind of smirked, thinking he'd have to use that spy he'd already planted on Morrow for this. He was like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna deal with the dude getting between him and Leuan. Meanwhile, Morrow had zero clue what Ryan was plotting. She was just chilling, enjoying some cake and living her best life. One of the chefs brought her his specialty, a tiramisu, and another chef totally lost his cool, blurting out that even he never gets to try it. Morrow just smiled and offered the second chef a spoonful of her tiramisu so he could try some too. Morrow was just so overstressing about everything going on, so she decided to just live in the moment, you know. Even if that moment was going to be super short. Morrow was in the middle of a super serious debate about which dessert to eat next when Letty came in with some seriously buzzkill news. Letty told her Leuan had decided to drop by for a visit, and Morrow was not thrilled. Morrow was like, tell her to leave, but it was already too late. Leuan just barged right into the room where Morrow was chilling and announced that they needed to talk. And just like that, Morrow's good mood was totally gone. She was seriously hoping she'd never lay eyes on Leuan again. Letty, picking up on her vibe, tried to tell Morrow that this meeting could actually be a good thing. But Morrow wasn't buying it, especially since Leuan just barged in without any heads up, totally crossing every line imaginable. Morrow's personal space just went poof. Leuan started going on about how happy she was to see Morrow, and how she felt like super guilty. Morrow just sighed, put on a fake smile, and asked Leuan to get lost. Leuan gave Morrow this pathetic look and said she really didn't want Morrow to hate her. And then it clicked for Morrow why Leuan was being so extra. This girl was so used to everyone loving her. She'd literally never had anyone dislike her before Morrow. That's exactly why it was bugging Leuan so much. It was like a tiny annoying stain on her perfect sparkly reputation. Morrow was like, so let me get this straight. You want to be friends again just because our fight is making you feel weird, and that's why you just barged into my house to force me to make up with you. Leuan shot back that she never meant anything like that. She admitted she'd been super clueless, but promised from now on she'd pay way more attention to Morrow, and she was hoping that they could just go back to the way things were since they used to get along so great. Hearing that just grated on Morrow's nerves. She asked if Leuan even remembered what she used to always tell Ryan, when she got nothing but silence. Morrow asked if she remembered what she'd told Kaiser. Still nothing. Leuan just blushed and looked away. Morrow said it wasn't like Leuan did one specific bad thing. It was that their ideas about friendship were on completely different planets, so they just had to be done. Marel decided the conversation was over and got up to leave the greenhouse. But Leuan grabbed her hand, desperately asking what would happen if she promised to change. Leuan asked if that would be enough to fix things between them. Marel turned around, totally surprised. Leuan's eyes were filled with tears. It was a super tough call to make, but Marel pulled her hand away from Leuan's and told her she'd already waited way too long. Marel thanked her for the good memories and then rushed out of there, thinking to herself that she was so sick of telling herself things would be different this time. What was the point of going back to someone who only ever caused you pain? Later, Marel was just lying on her bed thinking about how completely over everyone and everything. She wondered if she'd feel better if she just had a good cry, the way Leuan always did. Then she heard a weird noise. Marel figured it was just Letty, but nobody answered. So Marel had to get up and open the door herself to see who decided to show up this time. She was all geared up to kick another unwanted guest out, but then she saw it was Ladro. This guy actually didn't annoy her that much. So for that reason, Marel let him come inside to figure out why he'd randomly shown up. Marel, who was totally not in the mood to talk to anyone, basically asked what he wanted. The man said he had something for the girl. It turned out that the entire group had decided to prepare a gift for Marel to show their appreciation for what she had done for them. Marel was flattered by this. She didn't expect the actors to decide to give her a gift. Marel took the scarf out of the box, hugged it, and thanked them for the gift, saying she hadn't done that much. Leroux suddenly touched Marel's cheek and asked if she was okay. Marel's positive emotions were wiped away by this sudden gesture. Marel recoiled from Leroux and replied that she was perfectly fine and that he could leave. Ledro caught Marel's hand and said she could always turn to him for help or tell him about her problems. Marel felt a twinge of irritation. She was grateful that Leroux had given her the gift, but his further behavior was unnecessary. Marel repeated again that Leroux could leave, and the man replied that he would like to stay with Marel. Marel recalled Darcy's words about the rumors that Leroux was her lover. Ledro meanwhile got down on one knee and said he wouldn't dare to allow himself to become Marel's partner, but he would like to become her lover. Marel didn't understand why Leroux was suddenly acting like this. She was sure she hadn't given him a reason. Marel panicked. She wasn't sure if Leroux was pretending. Marel knew for sure that Leroux simply couldn't have had time to fall in love with her. They didn't spend time together. They were never alone. Leroux simply had no reason. Moreover, Marel realized that in such conditions, Leroux could not definitely find out who she was, and therefore he fell in love not with her, but with the image he had created himself. This infuriated Marel. Leroux showed up at her place without warning constantly, trying to touch her against her will. He didn't care how the girl felt. Marel sternly told Leroux that she didn't need lovers. She asked if the man understood how far he had crossed the line. The girl said that if Leroux was interested in this kind of relationship and not acting, then he shouldn't show himself to her anymore since she found this disgusting. Fortunately, Ledro quickly realized his mistake and rushed to apologize. Ledro promised that he would focus on acting, but Marel thought that if it weren't for Darcy's warning, she might not have responded with dignity. Marel smiled as she sat on the couch. Finally, the day had come when she was supposed to see Darcy. Darcy, as usual, didn't keep her waiting long, appearing right in front of Marel. Darcy leaned over Marel, and the girl, not feeling any discomfort near him, greeted him with a smile. The device that Marel had asked for was ready, and it was quite similar to modern cameras. Marel pushed a box of stones towards Darcy's payment, then said that he had been right. Marel said a little sadly that Leroux came to her with an offer to become her lover. Darcy jumped up from the couch and asked what exactly Marel had answered Leroux. The girl replied that she had refused and was very grateful to Darcy since she was able to respond appropriately. Darcy noted with displeasure that Leroux did not strike him as a man who would easily back down from his intended goal. Marel merely snorted and asked why this bothered Darcy so much in the first place. Darcy was taken aback and asked in surprise if Marel really thought this bothered him. Darcy said it was not at all realistic, and Marel noted that the man looked agitated. Darcy quickly changed the subject and suggested going to the theater to test a new feature he had invented for the recording device, which now allowed recordings to be transferred between two devices. Marel said that in that case she would now bring the recording device from the room with the theater. Darcy wanted to go with her. Marel recalled that in this case, Darcy could have been seen by actors which did not suit the man. Darcy asked Marel to hurry up as he did not want to be left alone. Marel was surprised to note Darcy's changed behavior. The girl sighed and said that it did not suit the man at all. Darcy chuckled and noted with satisfaction that Marel didn't fall for it. Soon Marel and Darcy were in the room. Marel turned on the device and just in case warned Darcy that this time the play would be a little different from the previous ones. Darcy noticed that Leroux was again playing the leading role and asked if Marel could replace him. Marel replied that Leroux had changed so everything was okay. Darcy said that the girl was too kind. Marel thought with bitterness that no one in this world had ever called her kind. The play that Marel and Darcy watched was written by P based on Marel's ideas. Marel suggested a popular theme for Korean dramas about complicated family ties. Marel liked it, but she asked Darcy if he was really interested in seeing this particular play. Darcy looked interested and replied that he was perfectly fine. The scenes that were played out in this play were close to Darcy himself. Darcy thoughtfully watched the tangled family connections and noticed that it was unusual for him to see it this way. Darcy noticed that the play ended just as Maro's favorite time of day arrived. Darcy turned on the music. Maro thanked him for it and suggested that she lie down too. Darcy grinned, agreed, and laid down next to Maro on the bed, although the girl didn't quite. They weren't even touching each other, so Maro could just ignore him. Darcy was right, but Maro suddenly realized that she was in the same bed with a man. Various strange thoughts crept into Maro's head. Maro assumed that it was because she had not yet slept at such a time. The girl asked Darcy to close his eyes. Darcy did not argue with Maro, and immediately fulfilled her request, closing his eyes. Maro thought that with Darcy, they didn't even need to talk or do anything, they just needed to be. As she closed her eyes, drifting off, she realized she felt totally at ease with him, even after she'd sworn she'd never find comfort with anyone ever again. Maybe it meant that one day she'd finally be able to stand on her own, 2 feet, and face what happened. After a bit, Darcy said it was time for him to go. As Maro watched him leave, it hit her that this might be the last time they ever saw each other. She glanced at the camera in her hands and an idea sparked. Maro was like, "Hey, let me get a picture before you go," something she could keep. Darcy didn't fight it, but every single photo she took of him came out a blurry mess. Maro looked at the pics, feeling a pang of sadness. She had to get a do-over. Then Maro just blurted it out. "I know this is the last time I'm going to see you." Darcy wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he stopped himself and just stayed quiet. Maro smiled and said, "Okay, for real this time, try to stand still." She set the camera on a table, then ran over to Darcy and stood right beside him. In the picture they took together, Darcy looked like a pouting kid, which made Maro laugh. She handed him a copy and said she hoped their time together would be a good memory for him. Darcy asked if all those memories were supposed to fit into one little photo, and then he totally blushed, hesitated, and finally thanked her. Maro laughed at how shy and flustered he suddenly got. Maro figured that whatever Darcy's whole story was, he was a good friend, and she hoped that someday he'd be able to break out of that room he was locked in and escape whatever was holding him back. Maro told him softly that she wished him the best. Darcy then asked if she could do one more thing for him, and when she agreed, he pulled her into a tight hug. Maro was surprised but hugged him back, wondering if this was what he'd meant. Darcy didn't seem to be in any rush to let her go. He whispered softly that she was really warm. Then he asked if she knew it had been like forever since he'd hugged anyone. Maro's heart ached. She just really wanted to thank Darcy for everything he'd done. She so badly didn't want him to leave. But she knew she had no right to hold on to him, especially since she was the one who'd tried to keep her distance. Darcy pulled back and gently squeezed her cheeks with his hand. Maro asked what the heck he was doing. He just said he liked seeing her look so serious because she was thinking about him. Darcy leaned in closer and said that he'd also be interested to see what it felt like to make her smile. Maro laughed and told him he was weird, but he just pointed out that she was in fact smiling. A silence fell between them, but it was that same comfortable quiet they'd had before. Maro looked back at Darcy and gave him a huge smile, wanting him to remember her just like that. Darcy smiled back, knowing it was really time to say goodbye now. But Maro said it first, and all Darcy could do was leave in silence, unable to find any words. Only later, when she was out of sight, did Darcy whisper for her to take care. He thought back to his childhood. His mother, Knight Germain, had told him to obey the Emperor's every command until he was an adult, or else his heart would literally shatter because of the curse she'd placed on her own son. Of all the powers mages could have, his mom's was mind control, and Darcy had inherited it from her. This super rare and powerful ability made Kaiser untouchable by other mages, which was exactly what he wanted as a ruler, so Knight Germain cursed her son for him. The woman would have done anything for the Emperor's love, but she died not long after leaving her son all alone in the world with his father. Lucky for the Emperor, Darcy wasn't interested in revenge. He just wanted to break free from the twisted chains of his parents' love as fast as possible, and his plan was honestly just to disappear. But something stopped him. Darcy accidentally overheard a conversation between Maro and the Marquis of V. Her father was insisting that Maro and Ryan had to get married. She was completely against it, but the Marquis wasn't listening. It stung Darcy to hear that Ryan was going to be crown prince, but it hurt even more knowing he was supposed to marry Maro. While Darcy was suffering on the battlefield, Ryan was studying books on being king and practicing his sword skills. Darcy knew Maro was way too good for Ryan, but when Kaiser decided something, what Ryan wanted didn't matter, and Maro's dad was clearly no help. Darcy didn't get why he was even thinking about it. It wasn't his business, but the image of Maro marrying Ryan made him feel sick. He told himself it was just because Maro was his first friend. He thought that he never should have let this happen, that he should have left this place ages ago, but now he knew he just couldn't leave. Darcy could see Maro was pretending to be okay, but on the inside she was vulnerable and in pain, and he just couldn't look away. Darcy decided he would do whatever it took to make sure Maro didn't have to suffer anymore. He realized that for things to go her way, he was going to need more power, and that probably meant he'd have to break his promise to Knight Germain and go against the Emperor. Darcy teleported into his room at the abandoned castle. He didn't even have to look around. He already knew his father was in the room with him. Darcy turned on the water, acting all chill like he was just taking a bath, then toweled off his hair. From under a stack of towels, Darcy grabbed a piece, sending a silent thank you to Morrow, because with his magic on lockdown, he couldn't touch the Emperor. But magically juiced items were a whole other story. After tucking the piece in his pocket, Darcy finally went out to face the Emperor. Kaiser asked what in the world was taking him so long. Darcy just gave him a soft smile and said he was just, vibing by himself. Emperor Kaiser said that was a good call. Right before he was supposed to die, Darcy scanned the room, his mood totally tanking. The irony was killer. He knew every single one of the guards Kaiser had brought along to take out his own son. The curse on Darcy was set to break at 2 a.m. The Emperor obviously showed up early, since after that time it would be a total... Actually, taking Darcy out was turning into a huge problem, so the dude had to stall big time. Darcy straight up asked the Emperor for a minute, and Kaiser wasn't about to deny what seemed like his son's dying wish. Emperor Kaiser was all set to go battle the mages whenever all because he was obsessed with efficiency and won over the people by being a hardcore knight, an unbeatable emperor who protected his country with his insane battle strategies. And to become that perfect emperor, it was super convenient to use some kid he never claimed as his stand-in on the battlefield. Darcy knew right then that he had zero room for error, because just one wrong move and he was toast. Darcy shot Case a dark look. This man had made him get his hands dirty, forced him to take out his own people. He couldn't even be called a father. Darcy let out a sharp breath, raised his hands with the loaded piece, aimed it right at Kaiser, and then said he was proposing they talk this out first. The guards were totally bugging. So Darcy popped off the warning shot, tagging Kaiser right in the palm. The Emperor dropped to the floor, clutching his messed up hand and screaming like crazy. Darcy, using all the chaos, walked right up to the Emperor and pressed the piece to his head. Darcy said with a smirk that he probably shouldn't mention that if he says something stupid, he'll be meeting all those mages he sent packing. The Emperor glared at Darcy, pure hate in his eyes. The guards were completely frozen. They got even more freaked out when Darcy asked if he should call Kay's dad or what. Darcy warned that if any of them so much as twitched, he'd shoot. And then he looked at the scion standing closest to him, saying he'd already seen what this thing could do. After that, Darcy started calling out each guard by name, telling them to answer him if they wanted the Emperor to see another day. The guards scrambled to answer, but the Emperor yelled that Darcy was just talking trash, that he didn't have the guts to actually off him. Darcy replied that apparently Kaiser seriously didn't get the mess he was in, but he'd let it slide just this once. Darcy noted with a grimace that he was still using the Emperor's formal title. He always had to treat Kaiser with so much respect, and he totally hated all that formal crap. Suddenly he wondered if Morrow was into all that formal stuff. Darcy figured that he had totally blown his first impression with Morrow. Now he really wanted a do-over and to look good for her. Keeping the gun steady on the Emperor's head, Darcy wondered if he needed to practice his cool guy look. The Emperor glanced at his watch and pointed out that he still had a whole 30 minutes before the curse on Darcy lifted, which meant Darcy still had to do what he said. Darcy laughed and crouched down in front of the Emperor, saying it was written all over his face. Then the laugh just died. Darcy told the Emperor, his voice ice cold, that he couldn't touch him anymore. The Emperor asked Darcy if he really thought he wouldn't just end him. When the Emperor tried to give Darcy an order, he suddenly realized the words wouldn't come out. Darcy asked with almost fake sympathy if the Emperor was having trouble giving orders now. Darcy said with a grin that the curse was already history, which was why the Emperor couldn't lay a finger on him anymore. Darcy asked if the Emperor was seriously trusting the clock in this room to tell time. Darcy explained that the clock was a good 30 minutes behind, so it was way past 2. On top of that, Darcy had managed to get not just the Emperor but all his guards under his thumb with his power, because all he had to do was call a person by name and get them to answer back. The Emperor looked at his men totally stunned, realizing his perfect plan had completely crashed and burned. Darcy wasn't bluffing. The Emperor could see it in his guards' eyes. They were totally under his spell. The Emperor started laughing, then asked if Darcy was planning on making him his puppet. Darcy just smiled and said that wasn't the plan. He had told him from the start that he came to negotiate. The Emperor just needed to listen up and get it. The Emperor declared that the rotten blood in Darcy's veins would never change, and next thing he knew, a piece was shoved against his forehead, and Darcy made his first demand. Case had to recognize him as a prince. Darcy demanded the news be announced at some big official event, and to make sure everyone knew that Kaiser sent Darcy to fight his battles for him. The Emperor tried to argue, but Darcy laid it out for him. Clearly either the Emperor plays along, or he becomes a literal puppet. Darcy also demanded that they push back Ryan's coronation ceremony. Darcy smirked, picturing the look on his brother's face when he wasn't the one getting the crown. Case was going to be the one to crown Darcy, and he needed that to happen. It was the only way Darcy could keep Morrow safe from the Emperor and Ryan. Now Darcy said he never actually bought it when the Emperor had called him Crown Prince, but man, he needed that title now. He figured once he was Emperor, he could finally make Morrow his, to live the life she actually wanted. The Emperor, looking super annoyed, said he'd give Darcy what he wanted, then demanded he get the weapon out of his face. Darcy moved it, but not before popping off a shot into the air that made the Emperor totally pass out. Darcy figured with the Emperor title, he could finally help Morrow find some real happiness. The next time he saw Morrow, Darcy planned on showing up, with some serious status. His thoughts drifted to Lero, and he realized he'd need to take a closer look at Morrow's little theater crew too. Darcy was in no rush to break the spell on the guards, thinking it was way too sketchy to be in the palace without any backup. Walking up to one of the guards, Darcy recognized his old friend. Man, it was always awesome teaming up with Kaiser. Darcy smirked when he thought about their battles. He'd found someone to have his back, and fast. Calling Kaiser's name, Darcy broke the spell. The guy slowly came to his eyes, focusing on Darcy. Meanwhile, Morrow was trying to convince her dad that she didn't even want to see the prince, let alone go to some lame party. The Marquis Del just said that Morrow should have known. This was going to happen anyway, so she should just get over it. The Marquis Del sighed, saying he thought Morrow actually liked Ryan. Morrow's heart sank. Her dad seriously didn't get her. At all. He didn't even see that he wasn't looking at his daughter anymore, but a completely different person. Ever since his wife died, the Marquis basically despised his own daughter. He couldn't stand looking at Morrow, who was a dead ringer for his lost love, but he wasn't strong enough to just kick her out. He made sure she had cash, but that didn't change the fact that he was a totally selfish person. The Marquis Del said he really hoped Morrow understood the deal, and then he just bounced. Morrow felt a sting of pain remembering that she'd almost forgotten. She had absolutely no one in this world on her side. All the girl wanted was to lock herself in her room, but they wouldn't even let her do that. Morrow just laid on her bed thinking that she didn't remember any party in the book, and definitely not Morrow becoming the crown princess. She started to freak out, wondering if her actions had totally messed up the story. The thoughts were way too much for Morrow. So unable to sleep, she decided to just walk around the estate. Letty spotted her and asked with a worried look what was wrong. Morrow just told her she couldn't sleep. Letty looked all pensive and lost, but Morrow was so not in the mood to deal with it. Then Letty suddenly apologized, saying she never should have let Leuan see Morrow. Letty admitted it was just hard for her to see Morrow like this, so she thought it'd be better if she and Leuan just made up, so Morrow could start going to all the social events again. Morrow frowned. After that whole mess with Leuan, she wondered if Letty thought she was pathetic too. Morrow decided to just put it all out there and asked what Letty was even talking about. She gave Letty this ice-cold look, something she'd never done before. Letty said she just felt like Morrow was going through a tough time, and that it could have a really bad effect on her. Morrow sighed. Okay, she could guess that Letty was worried, trying to be sympathetic, and that's why she was all up in her business. But at the end of the day, Letty's concern was just her trying to push Morrow back into society, and that made her furious. Morrow said darkly, "I'll just pretend you were looking out for me." Then Morrow raised her voice, declaring, "Don't ever let something like that happen again, so you better watch your damn words." She tried to explain that the moments that might look pathetic to other people were precious to her, like when she was just lying on her bed alone, watching recordings of plays or chilling in the garden. Morrow said she just needed all that time to get her head straight. Letty bowed to Morrow and apologized. The girl explained that at the time it just seemed like the best idea. Morrow kind of understood. Different people have different priorities, I guess. Letty knew nothing about the real Morrow, but then again, Morrow didn't know her maid's life story either. For that reason, Morrow softened up and just asked Letty not to say anything like that ever again. Letty said she was just getting antsy about the upcoming event. Morrow knew Letty had a ton of stuff to prep for it. Letty insisted she could handle it all, and then asked where Morrow was off to. In the middle of the night, Morrow just said she wanted to crash in the theater room for the night. Letty smiled and said in that case she'd bring some tea and cakes to the room, which should help Morrow get a good night's sleep. Morrow smiled back. She still liked Letty, even if she made some super sketchy choices sometimes. But a change of scenery, tea and cakes couldn't help Morrow fall asleep. She just laid there staring at the ceiling, her mind lazily running through everything she was supposed to do next. Morrow had absolutely zero clue what the imperial family's intentions were. Morrow figured maybe the whole wedding idea came from the emperor, and also that if anyone found out about her last conversation with Leuan, she'd get labeled the villain all over again. And she really missed Darcy right now, the one person she felt comfortable with. Darcy never saw Morrow as a bad guy. With him, she could just be herself. She missed him so much. Time just flew by without her even noticing. The only thing that helped Morrow kill time was her ever-growing collection of plays. She was also kind of glad that Lero was doing everything he could to stay an actor and was avoiding her like the plague. Finally, the day came when Morrow had to meet Ryan. She looked at the castle, thinking about how long it had been since she'd even gone out. Ryan was already sitting inside waiting for her. The guy showed up, making sure to keep like a ton of distance between them. Morrow gave a polite little curtsy, totally stalling so she wouldn't have to start a conversation with Ryan. Ryan got the vibe. He wasn't in the mood for some big heart-to-heart with Morrow either. Finally, Ryan just said he was glad they could at least agree on something. He flat out admitted he had zero desire to marry Morrow because he was already into lean. Morrow was like, "Yeah, I figured," so she just told him she already knew. Morrow said that unfortunately, even them both not wanting it wasn't enough to get them out of this mess. Suddenly, someone called Morrow's name and covered her eyes from behind. The stranger apologized for being gone so long, then pointed out that it looked like he got there just in the nick of time. It was a voice Mara recognized as Darcy's, and he told her not to even bother talking to Ryan, saying it might hurt her poor ears. Of course, Darcy's whole act totally set Ryan off, who had no clue who this guy was and demanded that Darcy introduce himself. Darcy, who was still covering Maro's eyes, just smirked and calmly said he was Ryan's older brother. After that, Darcy finally let Maro see again and told her that he had a life or death question for her. Darcy asked if Maro would prefer it if he spoke to her all formally. He gave Maro a bow, then suggested he give her a proper, formal introduction, and then she could decide which way of talking she liked better. Maro, totally confused, asked Darcy what he was even doing there. Darcy just said he wanted to see a certain girl. He smiled and said Maro's stunning look totally caught him off guard. Maro's face went bright red. She thought to herself that this was seriously not the time to get all flustered. And then she just hit Darcy with a ton of questions like why was he suddenly Ryan's brother, and what was he even doing here? But Darcy told her to answer his question first about how he should talk to her. Maro replied that she really didn't have a preference. So Darcy asked if his casual way of talking bugged her. The girl said that actually that style suited Darcy really well. Super casually and completely ignoring Ryan's fuming, Darcy said with a smile that Maro shouldn't get engaged to his brother. Darcy said he came back just to help Maro live the life she'd always dreamed of and to make her the happiest person on earth. Darcy said it was all because Maro had saved him. She mentally freaked out, wondering what that was even supposed to mean. The conversation got cut off by Ryan, who was so over being ignored. Ryan whipped out his sword and aimed it right at Darcy. Darcy was like, "Dude, where are your manners?" for interrupting their conversation like that. Ryan shot back that it was crazy rude for Darcy to act like he wasn't even there. Ryan then pointed out that even just saying Darcy was part of the Imperial family was a huge crime. Darcy told Maro to just stay in the hall and enjoy the food, while he and Ryan went to sort things out somewhere else. Maro was worried about Darcy, so she asked the guys to stay and talk it out in front of her. Maro didn't know what was really going on, but she had a bad feeling Darcy would be in trouble if he was left alone with Ryan. Darcy just smiled and said he loved how she'd asked him to stay, and then asked if she could say it again. Leaning in close to Maro, Darcy whispered for her not to worry about him. He promised he'd be back soon to explain everything to her. Maro looked at Darcy for a long moment, and then said that she trusted him. Darcy gave Maro a huge happy smile and said he really hoped she'd like the banquet. He wasn't sure what she'd like, so he just got everything. The guys left the hall, and just then the table was filled with all kinds of dishes. Maro decided not to stress and to just enjoy the food, which turned out to be seriously amazing. Maro realized this was the first time she'd ever had a peaceful meal at the palace, but she couldn't stop wondering how Darcy was doing. Meanwhile, Darcy was confidently leading Ryan into one of the rooms. Maro spotted some macarons on the table and thought it'd be sweet to get a box for Letty. But Letty wasn't exactly in the mood for sweets, and neither was Ryan, who was looking with absolute horror at what Darcy just showed him. Right there in front of Ryan was Letty, completely tied up. Darcy had this smug smile on his face as he looked down at her. Letty had a tight collar on and Darcy was holding her by it. Darcy said that Ryan's little spy in Maro's house turned out to be her own maid, then asked if that made Ryan a total scumbag. Letty, totally mortified, apologized to Ryan and said she never meant to get caught like that. Ryan knelt down in front of Letty, telling her it was all okay. Darcy pointed out that the rumors about Ryan being nice to his people were actually true. Ryan asked how Darcy even managed to find his spy. Darcy explained he noticed Ryan started spreading nasty rumors about Maro to call off the engagement. Letty was doing all the dirty work, so she was ridiculously easy to catch. For a second, Ryan was surprised that Darcy seemed totally unarmed, but that feeling died when Darcy pressed a gun to his head. Darcy said that case like this weapon so much that he basically passed out. Ryan asked grimly, "Who even are you?" Darcy replied that he was the guy from Castle Siren, the one Kaiser had been hiding for so long. Ryan, shocked, asked if Darcy was really the one the Emperor was hiding. Darcy just laughed and said Ryan was a super ungrateful brat since Darcy had let him live when he was a kid. Darcy said Ryan's name, then told him that this was the last time he'd ever show his brother any mercy. Suddenly, long-lost memories from his childhood came flooding back into Ryan's head. Ryan remembered he had seen Darcy once before, a long, long time ago. He was just some clueless kid. Darcy's whole vibe totally threw Ryan off back then because it was like nothing he'd ever felt. So Ryan demanded Darcy play with him. Darcy actually sat down next to him, called him a brave boy, and then ordered him to forget everything he knew about the abandoned castle, saying it was the only shot he had at staying alive. Ryan clutched his head, feeling the fog in his mind finally start to break apart. It hit him Darcy must have used some kind of mind control on him. That explained so much. Ryan realized the Emperor was hiding Darcy because of his insane power, but apparently Darcy was way too hard to keep on a leash, which is totally why the Emperor decided to just get rid of him. Ryan figured the Emperor probably wanted to do way worse, handing over the castle to erase all the evidence. But if so, it was super weird that Darcy was still alive. His mind jumping to the absolute worst-case scenario, Ryan demanded to know what Darcy did to the Emperor. Darcy shot back that he'd let the Emperor live because he needed Kaiser to name him Crown Prince. Ryan totally blew up, asking how Darcy dared to use some kind of dark power to control the Emperor and mess with him like that. Darcy replied that mind control wasn't the only trick up his sleeve, and then he fired a shot right at Letty, the bullet literally grazing her ear. Ryan immediately scrambled over to Letty, asking if she was okay. Letty, totally shaken, stammered that she was fine. Darcy said Ryan should be grateful he didn't just take out the spy. In Darcy's opinion, spying on someone's life without permission, all while claiming it's to protect the girl you love, was the kind of thing that made Ryan the real bad guy here. Ryan snapped back that Morrow had it coming, considering all the stuff she'd pulled. Darcy blasted the statue behind Ryan and said with a creepy smile that if he wanted to live, he'd better walk out that door right now. With a huge grin, Darcy said that he wanted to enjoy the party with Morrow. Ryan knew he had to back off, especially to check on Letty's ear, so he ducked out into the hall with her and ran right into Morrow. Morrow said she was coming to check on Letty and was like, "Oh my god, what happened to your ear?" Then she spotted Ryan and demanded to know why Letty was with him. It didn't take Morrow long to put the pieces together and figure out who the spy was. Morrow asked if Letty was seriously working with Ryan, all because she thought she knew what was best for her. After that, Morrow just burst out laughing hysterically, as it hit her that the one maid she actually trusted had been stabbing her in the back from day one. After a second, Morrow pulled herself together and said bitterly that she guessed no one was really on her side. Furious, Morrow asked Ryan if his whole beef with the All family was just some personal vendetta. Ryan shot back darkly that Morrow was the one who started the hostility first. Morrow thought that back in the day she would have tried to be super polite to Ryan even if it meant swallowing her pride, but after all this crap, everyone could just go to hell. Morrow told Ryan to cut the nonsense, since he was the one who crossed the line in the first place. Ryan was actually glad to see that Morrow had finally shown her true colors, but she just retorted that he'd completely lost his conscience in the name of love. Ryan didn't even try to deny it, saying he was ready to do anything for his love. Morrow scoffed, knowing it was useless talking to Ryan, and just told the prince to get lost. She said the party was so over, she was in no mood to talk, and she couldn't just leave Letty without getting her checked out. She added that she wasn't the same girl who used to love Ryan. Morrow said that was one thing that would never ever change, and then she turned for the exit. Ryan just stared after her, completely lost. Morrow added that Ryan should never have tried to find her again. The days of her bending over backwards for Ryan were long gone. After that, Morrow walked out of the castle, saying her final goodbye to Ryan. A worried Darcy caught up to her, asking if she was hurt. Morrow calmly replied that if she was, then Ryan would have gotten exactly what he wanted. Darcy gently brushed his hand against Morrow's cheek, telling her it was okay to let her guard down with him. He smiled and said that she had to know he was someone she could trust. Morrow thought it was kind of weird to trust Darcy, especially since Letty was the one who'd introduced them, but somehow she did. The girl stepped closer to him. Darcy asked what was wrong. Morrow said nothing was. She just wanted to admire his handsome face. Darcy got all flustered and said he thought making the cheesy jokes was his job, and Morrow asked if he was going to tell her what really went down. They decided to talk in the theater room. Darcy put on some music, trying to get his thoughts straight. Darcy said there was a ton he needed to tell Morrow, but first he had to show her the real him. He took out a contact lens, turned to Morrow, and showed her his different colored eyes. Darcy asked if Morrow thought his eyes were cursed. He said people always used to be afraid of them because of their color. He asked Morrow to be honest and tell him if they freaked her out too. Darcy said he didn't want Morrow looking at him if she hated them. Morrow reached out and touched his cheek, saying his multicolored eyes really suited him, and that they kind of looked like the sunset sky and daylight all at once. Darcy admitted he was so scared Morrow would hate his eyes too. She told him that was a totally stupid thing to think. Darcy looked at Morrow, completely relieved, knowing he was 100% right about his choice. After that, Darcy finally relaxed, sinking into the couch, and told Morrow that he and Ryan were brothers. Same dad, different moms. He said nobody knew that he was part of the Imperial family because officially he basically didn't exist. Morrow looked at Darcy, her heart aching for him. She'd kind of suspected something like this, but it was still so hard to hear it from someone she was close to. Darcy explained that he was really a mage, not just an artifact dealer. Turns out the Emperor fell in love with a mage a long time ago, and that's how Darcy was born. But the messed up part was his powers could be used for military purposes. The Emperor was totally torn. He hated mages with a passion, but he also really wanted to use his son's abilities, using his powers for his own selfish reasons. Darcy told her the Emperor basically threw him in some forgotten castle. He was just a puppet forced to do whatever his dad said. The rest of the time, Darcy was totally alone, like he didn't even exist. Darcy laid it all out. He was so desperate to get out because he knew the Emperor was planning to kill him. It clicked for Morrow that in the original story, the Emperor probably succeeded. And suddenly it all made sense why Darcy freaked out when she talked about locking herself away. Darcy told her that really she was the one who saved him because she helped him get the arcanium stones he needed to make a weapon. He said if he'd never met her, his whole life would have gone down a totally different, awful path. Darcy looked her in the eye and thanked her for everything she'd done, and she realized maybe she could actually help someone change their fate. Darcy admitted that even though she was his ticket out, he chose to stay because of her. The second he heard about her engagement to Ryan, he confessed he was scared Ryan would just make her miserable, He couldn't let that happen, not when she was the first person he'd ever actually connected with and gotten close to. Darcy said that's why he put his escape plans on hold. Morrow had to ask, so you're still going to leave eventually? Darcy told her that even as a royal, he had zero interest in living there. He felt like he didn't deserve it, and besides, there was nothing for him. Then Darcy stepped closer to Morrow, gently cupping her face in his hands, and looked right into her eyes. He told her all he wanted was to see her happy, and that he wanted to stay by her side. Darcy begged her to let him help, promising he'd get whatever title it took all for her. With a small smile, Darcy told her that's why she had to go chase her own dreams. Meanwhile, Ryan was stewing in his office, replaying everything that went down. Ryan kept hearing Morrow's last words to him over and over. He couldn't get a grip on why she was suddenly living rent-free in his head. Ryan totally expected her to keep chasing him like she always did, but she just didn't. He figured he must have really hurt her this time. For a second, he thought if Morrow was right, then he was the bad guy for going after an innocent person. But that little flicker of guilt, it vanished. Ryan slammed his fist on the table, deciding Marel was the real villain here, that she'd somehow messed with his head. He was convinced she was up to something. Ryan zoned back into his subordinate's report, his mind racing with all the things he had to handle. First on the list was figuring out Darcy, because if that guy was actually planning to make a move on his title, he had to be eliminated. Just then, Kaiser walked into his office, giving a slight bow. Ryan demanded to know what he wanted. Kaiser cut right to it, asking if he'd met Darcy yet. Ryan shot back, "How do you know him?" And Kaiser just said he thought Darcy would be a perfect fit for the throne. Ryan's knuckles went white as he gripped the table, asking if Kaiser was seriously trying to betray him. He sneered, saying he could see right through him. Ryan was sure this was all just jealousy because he had Leuan. Kaiser said he knew what it looked like, but he swore that he was only thinking about what was best for the Empire. Ryan just snapped, asking if they were even talking about the same Darcy, or if Kaiser was just bitter that Leuan chose him and wanted nothing to do with Kaiser. Ryan pictured Leuan running to him, seeking comfort in his arms. A wave of victory washed over him. He'd finally won. Leuan was his now. She chose him, Ryan, out of all the other guys. Just hearing Yuan's name made Kaiser's blood boil. He couldn't believe Ryan would stoop so low as to drag her into this. That's when Darcy stepped in, perfect timing as always, saying Ryan had it all wrong. It was simple. Kaiser just knew Darcy was way more capable than him. And with that, Darcy's fist connected hard with his brother's jaw, sending him crashing to the floor. Before Ryan even knew what hit him, Darcy yanked him up by the collar, lifting him off his feet. His voice was ice as he asked if Ryan was really that dense, demanding to know why the hell Morrow found him with Letty. A horrifying thought hit Ryan. On top of mind control, Darcy could teleport too. Spitting blood, Ryan told Darcy to go to hell, and that he was getting out of there. Darcy just called him pathetic for not getting it. Ryan wiped his mouth and asked if Darcy was seriously making a play for the throne. Darcy's answer was simple: for the sake of Marel's happiness, he'd rather not see Ryan in charge. Ryan shot back, "Is that seriously your only reason?" He went on about how the Crown Prince title was this noble, meaningful thing meant for someone who would dedicate their whole life to the Empire. Darcy aimed a gun right at Ryan and said his goal was a hell of a lot nobler than some line Ryan memorized from a book. Then he admitted he'd do absolutely anything for Morrow. Kaiser just stood back, staying out of it, even though you could tell he hated hearing Morrow's name. Darcy shoved Ryan hard, sending him sprawling on the floor again. Darcy declared that eventually everyone would see who really made the Empire better, and until that day, he told Ryan to just be a good little boy and stay out of the way. Out in the hall, Darcy noted that Kaiser looked like he had something on his mind. Kaiser admitted he'd sworn his loyalty, but he was finding it really hard to get on board with his whole thing for Morrow. Kaiser stated flat out that he was sure Morrow was playing him. Then he just asked him, "Do you actually love her? Are you positive she's not just using you?" Playing him. Darcy's whole view on love was messed up by his childhood, and seeing where his mom's so-called love for the Emperor got her. So Darcy shot back, making it clear he wasn't in love with Morrow. Darcy was 100% convinced he could never ever fall for Morrow, because he'd seen how that feeling just ruins people. He told himself he just wanted Morrow to finally be happy, for all her pain to just stop. Darcy knew what he was feeling wasn't the same thing his mom felt for the Emperor. It was something better, purer than love. Kaiser was totally blindsided that Darcy, the guy he pledged his loyalty to, had these kinds of feelings for Morrow, who he saw as some villain always plotting something sketchy. Kaiser tried to get through to Darcy again, but Darcy just laughed and was like, "Hey, remember that time I told you to dig up all the dirt on Morrow?" He didn't even wait for an answer before he dropped the bomb, saying he'd noticed something. He saw from the reports that most of the trash talk was coming straight from Ryan and Kaiser, who got a real kick out of punishing Morrow, but they always took it way too far. They even turned her being a little jealous as a kid into some kind of mortal sin. Morrow apologized a whole year ago, and after that everything just looked like a total accident. So Darcy wondered if Kaiser was really that clueless to be so hard on Morrow. Kaiser tried to play the "it's my duty as a good guy to warn you" card, but Darcy cut him off, got right in his face, and asked if he was really gonna pull a Ryan and try to brainwash him into thinking Morrow was the problem and deserved everything she got. Darcy promised he'd make Kaiser wish he'd never been born if he even dared. Then Darcy just turned and walked off, telling Kaiser not to use his prejudice as an excuse. Kaiser let out a tired sigh. He still couldn't bring himself to feel bad for Morrow, but he also knew that arguing with Darcy about it was pointless and honestly kinda dangerous. Meanwhile, Morrow was just zoned out on her bed, lost in thought. Not even sweets could snap her out of this funk. Morrow replayed that conversation with Darcy where she tried to pretend she was totally fine. Darcy had told her that people, like, no matter who they are, aren't meant to be alone. Morrow then realized she wanted to bail on society, and it wasn't just because of the Emperor. On top of that, Morrow was so frustrated that she'd been completely isolated with no one to talk to. Darcy had told Morrow that it was perfectly normal to want to hide out, that she was just finally giving herself a break from all the exhausting drama. Darcy promised her that from now on things would be different, because he'd be there for her. Morrow managed a small smile, thinking that was actually super sweet of him. She got out of bed, realizing Darcy was right. She couldn't just run away forever. Morrow decided to hit up her office and get some work done, but after having a piece of cake, she completely blanked on what it was she was supposed to do. Morrow thought about how when she first landed in this world, all she wanted was to travel and study magic. But in the end, she was forced to compromise and just try to make things work, but it always ended the same exact way. Ryan would dump some new accusation on her, then wrap Leuan in a hug and drag her as far away from Morrow as possible. Ryan would literally do anything for Leuan, even if it was a totally shady move. And right now, Morrow really wanted to get back at Ryan to make him finally get what was coming to him for always looking down on her. But Morrow didn't want her whole life to just be about getting revenge. Her eyes landed on the pictures she took with Darcy. People might still be sus about magical items, but Morrow had seen for herself how much joy those things could bring people. Morrow realized that with photography you could literally capture a moment in time, and that was pretty beautiful. She thought maybe she could make magical items a trend, but she'd need help from other mages because Darcy was going to be totally slammed after the coronation. Morrow was curious what the other mages were even like. She'd heard they were super proud and preferred to stick to themselves, but she wasn't about to believe a bunch of rumors. Morrow was feeling good, a plan starting to form in her head right when a new maid walked in. The maid offered Morrow some tea, but she was like, "I have stuff to do," and asked for Letty to be sent in. The worst part was Morrow couldn't just fire Letty yet, but she was trying to dig up all the info she could on how Letty got a job in her house in the first place. Letty's references were flawless. None of the other servants would ever think she was a spy. Morrow knew exactly who was to blame. Only Ryan, who just had to have his own mole watching her. Letty came back to the estate a few days after her whole spy thing was exposed. Morrow met her at the front door, and Letty immediately started apologizing. But Letty was so not a friend anymore, so Morrow coldly told her she didn't come all the way out here just to listen to some lame apology. Morrow knew exactly what the deal was. Ryan was invisibly pulling Letty's strings. There was zero chance Morrow could trust her. Anything she said would get right back to him. So with that in mind, Morrow told Letty she was planning on getting her social life back and going out more. Morrow made it clear this wasn't what anyone expected, because Ryan meant absolutely nothing to her now. Letty, who was so sure Morrow was ending her isolation because of Ryan, asked what other reason she could possibly have. Morrow just gave her a confident smile and said she still had her own plans. A couple of days later, would have done literally anything for Patal. The play he helped Morrow write was about to hit the big stage. Patal was so stoked and super grateful to Morrow, which is why he took a major risk by inviting her to the premiere, even knowing she was a total homebody. Morrow figured the buzz around the play was already huge, so it was the perfect chance to start her magical item side hustle right there at the theater just by dropping hints that some special props were involved. As Morrow was getting ready, she remembered Patal had given her 2 tickets. She was dying to ask Darcy to go with her, but she was positive he was way too swamped. So imagine her shock when she saw Darcy himself opening the estate door. Morrow couldn't stop smiling when she saw Darcy. He looked seriously good that day. Darcy was waiting by the carriage, trying to look casual, brushing imaginary dust off his suit. Morrow practically ran over to him all giddy and asked what he was even doing at her place. Darcy just smirked and said he'd heard a certain girl needed a date for the theater. Once they were in the carriage, Morrow asked how Darcy even knew about the whole theater thing. He told her Patal had been bragging a little too loudly that the one and only Morrow was gracing his show with her presence. Then all of a sudden Morrow felt the whole vibe shift. Darcy's mood totally tanked, and she quickly asked what was wrong. In this super low voice, he asked why she hadn't just invited him herself. Morrow tried to explain that she just figured he was crazy busy. But he explained the official ceremony wasn't until next week, so he was totally free for her. Morrow pointed out that she hadn't told a soul she was even going anywhere. And Darcy was like, "I didn't know that either." Then he flashed this smile and said that honestly he just really wanted to see her. Morrow felt her cheeks get hot and turned away, saying that he was way too good at saying things that made her blush. When the carriage stopped at the theater, Darcy jumped to get the door for Morrow and helped her step down. He basically pulled her into a hug, which sent a fresh wave of heat to her cheeks and made her heart do a total backflip. Darcy and Morrow showing up together created a massive scene. Everyone was dying to get a look at the mysterious prince. Morrow shot a quick glance at Darcy to check if he was okay, since he'd mentioned this was his first time at a big event like this. Darcy looked totally chill even though he was the center of attention, but there was also this untouchable vibe about him. Maro's mood soured a little, which Darcy totally noticed, but he didn't get a chance to ask why. Just then Maro spotted Patel rushing over to her, so glad she actually came. Maro thanked him for the invite. The playwright then asked if the guy with her was her fiancé, but Maro quickly explained that Darcy was just a friend. Then it clicked for Patel who Darcy was, and he started tripping over himself apologizing, but Darcy just waved it off like it was no big deal. Darcy then pulled Maro close and said he was really looking forward to the show. Elro, who was standing nearby, caught the whole thing and her face just fell. Darcy and Maro were about to go inside when Maro saw the one person she'd hoped to never run into again. Leuan was there with some random guy, which was kind of weird. As soon as Leuan saw Maro, she came over and said she was just there for the famous play and had no clue Maro would be there. Maro gave a polite little curtsy back and said it was all good, hoping Leuan would enjoy the show. Inside the hall, Maro couldn't help but think that it was super weird for Leuan to show up at an event like this without Ryan, but she decided to just drop it. Darcy leaned over and asked if this was the same play they had watched together. The girl nodded and admitted she never thought back then that this play would hit so close to home for him. Maro was worried it would be awkward for Darcy to see it again, but he promised her that he was planning on watching it more intensely than anyone. That made Maro smile for real. She loved how open Darcy was when it was just the two of them. The show was a total hit, and Maro was so proud to have been a part of it, feeling like her plan to tease the magical items here was genius. Then Patel got on stage and gave this huge shout out to Maro, saying none of this would have happened without her. But what really blew Maro's mind was when Patel basically read her mind and said he hoped that one day Maro's treasure that made the play so successful would become famous. Maro grinned, realizing Patel had just done her a massive favor. Looking at the ecstatic actors, Maro thought about how lucky she was to have met such an awesome troupe. Darcy, meanwhile, said the story and acting were solid even for the second time around. Maro asked if he actually had a good time, and he said that it had been okay, but he liked watching plays at her house way more since he still wasn't a fan of big crowds. Then he asked if she felt like inviting him back to her place. Maro went completely red for like the millionth time that day, thinking that nobody could ever say no to him. So of course Maro ended up inviting Darcy over, even though they'd already spent the entire day together. Maro was worried this would cause major drama, thanks to the gossip that high society loved to spread. She told Darcy what was on her mind, but he just said he didn't care what anyone said about them, and then asked if she was okay with people linking her to him. Since Maro was cool with it, and he obviously was too, he didn't see what the problem was. Flopping onto the bed, thinking Darcy was seriously impossible to figure out sometimes. He was always so confident, totally unfazed by what other people thought. Then he just turned on some music. Maro totally turned to look at him, surprised. Darcy sat on the edge of the bed and asked how she was feeling. He put his hand on her forehead, saying she looked a lot more relaxed than she did before. After a beat, Darcy asked if she was planning on keeping the magical items a secret. Maro admitted that was the plan at first, but now she was thinking about starting something bigger. A business like actually making magical items. Maro said she wanted to make them available to everyone, but she'd have to find other mages to pull it off. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was totally up for it. For the challenge! Darcy asked, sounding kinda distant, if doing all that would actually make her happy. Maro had to admit the business was a killer way to get revenge on Ryan, since it was meant to wreck his future. But that wasn't the only reason she wanted to do it. Maro looked Darcy right in the eye and said she just wanted to bring some joy to people going through the same stuff she did. For people who are totally burnt out and just want to chill at home. Maro wanted to give them better ways to spend their time, believing that paintings filled with stories and memories could really help. Give people the strength to get back on their feet. Maro told him that yeah, she really believed this could make her happy. But Darcy's reaction was a total buzzkill. He got all gloomy again. Darcy looked down and said it would be hard for him to help her with her idea, then asked if she would just hear him out. Meanwhile, Letty was telling Ryan every word Maro had said, about how she was planning on breaking her confinement. Ryan thanked Letty and said he had other things to deal with. He went into the Emperor's room, greeting Kaiser, who actually looked kind of at home, to skip the small talk, and said he had a full read on the situation. Ryan stated flat out that he and the Emperor needed to deal with Darcy, but Kaiser shot back that they couldn't do it alone. Kaiser told Ryan there was a treasure somewhere that could break the mind control, and that Ryan had to be the one to find it. On top of that, Kaiser said they would need a weapon. Something like Darcy's, but way more powerful, which meant they needed an alliance with the Effes. The Eiffel clan was a Leuan clan, which totally threw Ryan for a loop. The Emperor explained why. The Eiffel wouldn't be able to say no since they were desperate for arcanium. Ryan asked what the Emperor was talking about since the Epical family owned an arcanium mine. Kaiser shot back that the arcanium reserves were getting low and would be gone completely soon. The news totally rocked Ryan. He just couldn't believe the arcanium was actually disappearing. The Emperor didn't even notice Ryan's reaction. He was lost in thought about how they needed to pressure the mages into making a weapon even more powerful than Darcy's gun. Ryan thought super annoyed that the Emperor wasn't even capable of a real conversation right now. Ryan decided it was useless to try and get a straight answer out of him, and just said he'd contact the Effes. Then the Emperor said that he had one more thing for him to do. One more task for Ryan. He had to make Marel fall for him like head over heels. Ryan struggled to keep a straight face, thinking the Emperor was talking crazy, but in the next second, he remembered all the rumors going around that Marel and Darcy had shown up at the theater together. Marel was the one person that Darcy, who'd never shown interest in anyone, had actually noticed. Ryan asked if this whole task was because Darcy was attached to Marel. The Emperor replied that Ryan wasn't as dumb as he looked. Then the Emperor explained. Darcy wasn't the type to show his emotions, but he'd actually let Marel get close, which meant she could be used to control him. Ryan thought to himself that Marel had definitely been in love with him before. But the last time they saw each other, she had this really weird look on her face. The Emperor added that this would be good for Leuan too, because if Ryan became the crown prince, then Leuan would be safe. Ryan knew the Emperor was right. If Darcy became crown prince, he and Leuan would be in serious danger. Ryan said with total confidence that if he was just kind to Marel, she'd fall for him again. The Emperor replied that winning a girl's heart should be a piece of cake for Ryan since he was just like his father. Meanwhile, Darcy was trying to get his thoughts together to finally talk to Marel. Marel tried to cheer him up, telling him she was always ready to listen. Darcy warned her it was a long story, and then asked if he could lie down next to her. Marel's mind immediately started spinning. This was the first time Darcy had ever wanted to talk about something serious with her, and she really wanted to see his face, but she didn't argue. She just told him to make himself comfortable, next to her. Darcy didn't waste a second lying down beside her and thanking her. Marel studied his face, which was now super close to hers. Darcy started telling her his mother was a magician. She fell in love with the Emperor at first sight. Marel thought that as hard as it was to believe now, the Emperor used to be super popular. It made sense why Darcy and Ryan were both so good looking. Darcy went on explaining that the Emperor hated mages, and his mother Knight Germain was no exception. He said that because she was in so much pain from him not loving her back, she did something terrible, something she never should have done. She used her power to make the Emperor fall for her. Marel asked what kind of power he was talking about, like what exactly did his mother do? Darcy hesitated, saying he still wasn't sure if telling her was the right move. Telling Marel about his power was the right move, but he had to be the one to do it, not anyone else. Marel totally got it. She knew how society treated mages, so she wanted to hear it, straight from Darcy. She told him that explaining that other people would just twist it into something awful. Darcy cracked a smile, saying it almost felt like she was using a similar power on him, because she was saying exactly what he needed to hear. Marel figured it was just because they had so much in common, and he couldn't really argue with that. Having made up his mind, Darcy confessed that he could control people's minds. Marel was surprised, but a part of her felt like she'd already suspected something like that. Case was pretty incompetent, so he'd need a way to control. The magicians and Darcy, who had no choice in the matter, was forced to help him. Darcy's voice was tense as he asked if his abilities freaked her out, admitting even his own father was afraid of them. Marel just calmly asked how exactly his mind control worked. Darcy replied that all he had to do was say the person's name and look them in the eyes. Marel then asked if there were any downsides to a power like that, since it sounded like a total nightmare, which made Darcy ask if she was really sure she wasn't scared of him. He told her he could be controlling her mind right now, and she wouldn't even know, but the girl shot that down immediately, saying she was 100% sure he'd never use his powers on her. Marel said her feelings for him came from her own heart and experiences. Darcy let out a huge sigh of relief and said he was so glad Marel wasn't freaked out by his abilities. He confessed that his power felt more like a curse, and that it was how his mother had trapped the Emperor, which only made the Emperor hate mages even more. Darcy's mom just wanted to be loved for real, so she let the Emperor's mind go. The second he was free, he tried to kick her out, but she gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. Knight Germain gave the Emperor a son with her exact same powers, and told him he could do whatever he wanted with the boy. Knight Germain then put a curse on Darcy, one that would literally shatter his heart if he disobeyed the Emperor before he came of age. Marel was absolutely horrified by what she was hearing. She couldn't believe that any mother could do that to her own son. Darcy said he could never escape the Emperor's orders, so he was forced to fight on countless battlefields, taking the lives of so many people. Marel was just stunned. She had no idea what to say. Should she try to comfort him or just stay quiet? Darcy then said that because of all that, simply wanting her to be happy was more than he could ever ask for. He told her he couldn't wish for his own happiness. He just didn't think he was allowed to be happy. It hit Marel like a ton of bricks how much Darcy blamed himself for what he'd been forced to do. Marel said, her voice filled with anger, that the Emperor was just using him. Darcy just replied that it didn't change the fact that he was the one who did those things. Marel wondered sadly to herself just how much darkness Darcy was hiding behind that smile. He'd been used and controlled his whole life, but he still chose to walk away instead of getting bloody revenge on Kaiser. He chose a voluntary exile. Instead of punishing the Emperor who had stained his life with so much hate, Darcy decided to forget it all. But then he met Marel. She was the reason Darcy decided to stay, instead of leaving. He gave up on all his own plans just to make her happy. Marel smiled softly, and said that if he really wanted her to be happy, there was something he had to do. In that case, she said Darcy had to promise to be happy too. Morrow told him that until he was, she could never really be happy either. Darcy stared completely floored at the hand Morrow held out to him. He was so confused. He never expected her to ask for something like that. Darcy had never even considered that he could find happiness. As he thought about it, the only thing that came to his mind was Morrow's smile. He realized in that moment that Morrow asterisk was asterisk his happiness. Suddenly he was hit with this insane urge to touch her, to kiss her. Darcy himself didn't expect to feel anything so strong, and he totally panicked. He stumbled back from Morrow, turning away so she couldn't see his face. He told himself he couldn't think about her like that the feeling would go away, and that he just wanted to stay by her side. Morrow's heart ached seeing how much he was struggling. She tried to smile and said that it wouldn't be easy, so maybe they could talk about it another time. At that moment, Darcy's eyes dropped to Morrow's lips and he blushed like crazy. He shot up from the bed, turning his back on Morrow so she wouldn't see his face. After that, Darcy mumbled that they should totally talk later, and then rushed out. Morrow, though, was just thinking that it was obviously so hard for him to be vulnerable with her. She realized the reason Darcy couldn't let himself be happy was because of all the guilt he felt about the magicians. Morrow's hand went to her camera as she thought that maybe with these magic items she could help both the magicians and Darcy. The Empire was always hunting down mages, except for the few who turned on their own kind and swore loyalty to the crown. Public opinion of that other mages was crazy negative. Some mages totally beaten down by the hate and violence rebelled against the Empire, and the battles had been raging for years, just going around in a vicious circle. The really mysterious part of the whole mess was that even though Kaiser could have used Darcy's power to wipe out the mages for good, he didn't. The Emperor just tortured the mages instead. Like he was giving them false hope, wanting the mages to just keep coming back to fight. Morrow had no clue why he needed this, but the Emperor totally had to have a reason. The mages, completely exhausted from years of being hunted, had bailed to the forest, and now it was Morrow's job to track them down. Morrow figured since she had money, she could totally help the mages out. Marel knew that if she helped them, the Emperor would flip out, people would spread nasty rumors, and it would put her in a super awkward spot. But Morrow thought she had it all handled, and that Darcy was on her side. With Darcy backing her up, Morrow felt like she had nothing to be scared of. A butler walked into Morrow's office and dropped off some letters for her. The girl just told him to leave them on the table. Morrow started looking through the letters super carefully. The play had caused the huge stir. Now she just had to figure out who the best people to connect with were. But one letter made Marel totally furious. It was from Ryan asking her for a private chat. Marel wondered if this was his noble way of inviting her to meet up so he could, chop her head off. Ryan wrote that he wouldn't take no for an answer, but Morrow just thought annoyed that she should just write back a hard no right away. Marel couldn't believe Ryan could possibly still think she was into him. As she was about to rip up the letter, Marel noticed there was a second page. Ryan wrote that the whole reason for the upcoming ball at the palace where he wanted to see Morrow was because of Darcy. Marel thought, okay, if this has to do with Darcy, then she probably really had to go to this ball. Darcy had basically vanished after their last walk, which had Kaiser super worried. He hadn't even shown up to his office for a whole day. Kaiser decided to go into Darcy's room, giving him a heads up that he was coming in. Darcy was slumped back in his chair, looking exhausted and totally lost in thought. Kaiser figured he was stressing about Empire stuff, but Darcy shot that idea down. Kaiser asked what was on his mind then, but the guy said he didn't see any reason why he should tell Kaiser anything. Darcy added that he didn't get why he had to report to Kaiser at all. Then Darcy sat up straight and guessed that since Kaiser came himself, he must have some juicy news. Kaiser thought for a second that Darcy's whole vibe was perfect for a prince. Kaiser reported that Ryan had met with the Emperor, and even though Kaiser couldn't hear everything, their reason for meeting was pretty obvious. Darcy demanded that Kaiser tell him about every single person Ryan was in contact with. Darcy thought that just wiping out Ryan and the Emperor with their crew in one go would be no fun at all. Darcy's plan was to give them a little room to breathe, and right when they thought they had a tiny shred of hope, he wanted to bury them alive. Darcy's expression turned seriously terrifying for a second, but the one person whose opinion he cared about couldn't see it. Darcy figured that only by dragging it out could he really enjoy his revenge. After that, Darcy thought it would be more humane anyway, because he didn't want to freak Morrow out. Darcy ordered Kaiser to secretly get in touch with all the mages connected to the palace and tell them Darcy wanted a meeting. After that, he tossed Kaiser a cloak. Darcy explained it had an arcanium sewn into it, which would let Kaiser track Ryan without being seen. Kaiser thanked Darcy and asked how the plans were going for the ball being thrown in Darcy's honor. Darcy looked like he was hearing about this for the very first time. Kaiser explained that a ball was happening soon where all the aristocrats of the Empire would be there. Darcy answered honestly that it was the first he'd heard of it, which kind of threw Kaiser for a loop. Darcy said he needed to get ready carefully since all the big-shot aristocrats would be at this ball. Darcy smiled, totally pleased, and said he had to look his absolute best for Morrow. On the day of the ball, the maid was getting Morrow ready, and she was surprised the girl picked such a low-key outfit. The maid asked if Mara was sure she didn't want to wear something a little flashier, but the girl thought her dress was perfect. Marel figured she wasn't the main character of this party, so she didn't want any extra attention. She just had to give Darcy a gift. Inside the box was an arcanium which was supposed to show that Mara was 100% on Darcy's side. Maro's carriage pulled up to the Imperial Palace, and the girl was shocked at the insane number of rides. Everyone was there to see Darcy, but she knew not all of them had good intentions. Marel stepped out of the carriage thinking about how she hadn't seen Darcy in a while. Mara was getting seriously nervous, wondering if Darcy had even thought about what she'd said. Mara couldn't wait to see Darcy, but she planned to check out the ballroom first. But on the way, Marel ran into the absolute last person she wanted to see. Ryan popped up right in front of Mara. Ugh, she thought. He was so annoying. Even the sound of Ryan's voice was gross to Mara. She just didn't want to hear it. Marel curtsied and said politely that Leuan was supposed to be there any minute. Marel tried to walk away, but Ryan stopped her, saying he needed to talk to her. Mara told him to make it quick because people were staring and Leuan was about to show up. Ryan said the conversation would take a while, and then he invited her into a private room. This was so exhausting for Mara, but this time she decided to just go along with it. When Mara walked into the room, Ryan slammed the door behind her and got way too close to her. Seeing Mara's reaction, Ryan actually thought this was what she wanted from him, for them to be alone this close. Marel, however, thought that being this close to Ryan was totally grossed her out. Ryan said he'd thought about it for a sec and decided he'd been way too harsh on Mara. After that, he actually apologized to Mara, which completely shocked her. At first, Mara just stared at Ryan like, "Is this guy for real? Does he really think I'm that stupid?" Ryan didn't apologize when Leuan's spying was exposed, but now he was hoping Mara would just fold. Mara realized Ryan thought she was still the same old Mara who was completely obsessed with him. She wondered why he even needed her to still be into him. Like, what could Ryan possibly get from her crushing on him? But then it clicked for Mara pretty fast that this was 100% about Darcy. Mara knew she was the only person who'd gotten close to Darcy, so everyone probably thought she was some pawn they could use. Mara had to laugh because it would take something seriously epic to make Ryan apologize. She figured, okay, it was time to finally show Ryan that the old Mara was officially dead and gone. Mara faked a smile, put a hand on her heart, and said she was so glad that Ryan finally believed her. Ryan, totally convinced Mara had fallen for his act, started his next big speech with a smug look, but she cut him right off. Mara said that this meant they could finally be done with all this, since Ryan was always hounding her about her feelings. Ryan's voice turned to ice as he asked what exactly she meant by that. Mara, keeping her cool, said she was just thrilled he'd finally accepted that she no longer loved him. She pointed out that because he couldn't get that through his head before, he'd basically bullied her, always accusing her of lying. Ryan tried to backtrack, saying he just believed Mara wouldn't try to hurt Leuan again. Mara was like, "Yeah, it's the same thing. If I don't like you, then I won't bother Leuan." The only reason Mara would ever mess with Leuan was because of Ryan. So she figured if she left Leuan alone, Ryan would have zero proof she was still hung up on him. Mara was so satisfied seeing Ryan look completely floored, and then she stepped closer to him. Mara asked if he ever imagined she'd actually talk back and tell him to his face that she had zero feelings for him. Ryan was clearly ticked off that his whole master plan was going down the toilet. Mara noticed his eyes were filled with confusion now. She was so glad all the unspoken drama between them was finally over. Mara was so proud that she was able to put Ryan back in his place. She let out a little laugh, thinking this was the first time Ryan was meeting the real Mara. She asked, "So I'm understanding you right? You believe me that I won't lay a hand on Leuan again?" Mara knew this was her chance to end this whole dramatic mess, and she was also dying to see what Ryan would do next. Ryan was so flustered he couldn't find the words to answer her. Then he asked if Mara really didn't love him anymore, which totally stunned her because his voice was full of regret. Mara was like, "Isn't this what you wanted?" Since she wasn't going to mess with Leuan anymore, Ryan asked all gloomily why she would even break her house arrest to meet him, and then he started getting closer and closer to her. Mara was frozen solid because locking herself in her house had absolutely nothing to do with Ryan. She was thinking about how much Ryan was creeping her out as he kept coming closer when suddenly there was an explosion. Ryan stared at the door, totally confused, and asked, "What just happened?" Darcy appeared through the settling dust, joking about what he'd just done. Darcy said Ryan was pathetic for treating Mara like this. Ryan shot back angrily, asking if Darcy had any idea what he was even doing. Darcy and Mara looked at each other, trying to guess what had triggered such an insane reaction. Darcy cracked a huge smile, and Mara thought that smile was just for her today. She also realized she couldn't help but admire Darcy like a lot. Mara completely tuned out the fact that they weren't the only two people in the room. Going up to Darcy and holding out her hand, Mara suggested they should probably ditch this crazy scene. She glanced around nervously as Darcy led her through a bunch of super nosy people, and from the looks everyone was giving Darcy, it was obvious no one missed the explosion. Mara asked why Darcy would do something like that, and he just said he was putting both high society and Ryan in their place. Mara asked what kind of impression he was trying to make. Darcy said he wanted to seem like a total lunatic that no one would ever dare to mess with. Morrow smiled and said that in that case Darcy had absolutely nailed it. She patted him on the shoulder and said he'd done an awesome job. Darcy asked a little weirdly if the pat on the shoulder was supposed to be some kind of compliment from her. Morrow was surprised and said, "Oh well, if you don't like it, I won't do it again." Darcy told her she should keep going. Even crazier, the guy knelt down in front of her and asked Morrow to pet his head. Darcy smiled for real and added that Morrow should have called him a good boy. This was definitely a new one for Morrow, who was a little weirded out by Darcy's whole act. She thought about how Darcy had put her in the most awkward situation ever, kneeling and asking for these embarrassing things in front of everyone. Annoyed, Morrow told Darcy to get up, but he said he'd only do it if she patted him on the head. Darcy looked right into her eyes and said she just needed to pet him a little bit. Morrow reached her hand toward Darcy's head, but froze, thinking it was just so strange to pet a friend's head. Morrow felt like she was crossing a major line. For Darcy, it was maybe excusable since he might not know the rules of how to act, but not for her. Darcy took her hand, pressed it to his cheek, and begged her to stroke his hair. Finally, after he was so persistent, Morrow caved. Marel actually knelt down, petting Darcy's head. Morrow told herself this was a one-time thing for sure. From the outside, the sight of her stroking his hair probably looked super weird. Darcy was totally loving it, not caring at all what anyone else thought. Morrow, though, couldn't help but smile, thinking his hair was really soft. A grown guy kneeling in front of a girl in the middle of a hallway, with his head pushed forward and his eyes closed. It should have been hilarious, but to Marel it didn't even feel strange anymore. She wondered if she looked that peaceful when she was chilling with Darcy at home. Marel figured that with the whole prince title, Darcy was about to get slammed with way more responsibilities. She just really hoped his future wouldn't be like full of drama. Darcy suddenly asked if Morrow thought he was weird because he could never be serious around her. Right after he got up from his knee, Morrow replied that she'd only think he was weird if she didn't know his whole backstory. Darcy kinda looked away, admitting it was hard to pinpoint exactly what he was feeling for her. And honestly, Morrow totally got it, because she had no clue what their relationship was either. Was it a romance thing? A friendship thing? Morrow couldn't even figure out what she wanted from Darcy. Marel kept telling herself that they needed to set some boundaries, but every single time the guy got close to her, Morrow just found herself reaching out to him. She invited Darcy to continue their just-finished conversation in her room, saying that since neither of them had answers, maybe they should just follow their hearts. Morrow thought that when it came to Darcy, she didn't want to have any regrets. This guy had literally changed his entire life for her, so it felt wrong to rush to judge or guess how deep his feelings were. Morrow said that relationships are always complicated, and it's totally okay to feel confused. Darcy said it was the first time anyone had ever told him it was okay to be confused. Morrow replied that being a mess is just part of being a person. Darcy said that Morrow always had the answers to his questions and that she'd never been wrong about anything. Morrow totally blushed at the compliment, and her heart did a little flip. She spun around fast, trying to hide how flustered she was from Darcy, and suggested they finally get out of the hallway. The palace, meanwhile, was basically a beehive of gossip, with everyone talking about Darcy. As she walked past people, Marel noticed the rumors about him were getting wilder, but the guy just said he didn't care. Morrow and Darcy walked up to the throne room. Morrow asked if Darcy was ready for the whole coronation deal. Darcy didn't answer. Morrow glanced at him. He looked pretty chill. She didn't push it, just watched as Darcy straightened his suit. Darcy caught her staring and asked her what was up. Morrow said that since she was always giving him answers, it was his turn to give her one. She asked him what exactly would make him happy. Morrow said Darcy deserved to be happy too, so she wasn't going to back down until he answered. She told him that if he wouldn't tell her, she'd just find the answer herself. But Morrow made it a point to tell Darcy that this was the first time she had ever asked him for a favor. Pushing open the doors to the throne room, Morrow turned to Darcy, smiled, and said she'd be waiting for his answer. Darcy had no idea what to say to her right then. He was kinda thrown. He just watched as Morrow walked into the throne room first. The room instantly made Morrow feel uncomfortable. The chandeliers were so bright they were practically blinding. The ceiling was so high it felt like it was going to poke the sky, kind of like how all the sharp stairs were poking her in the back. Morrow knew for sure she was back in high society, where you had to fake smile at people who were fake smiling right back at you. Suddenly, the one person who wasn't part of the fake crowd came up to her. Celine decided to say hi, even though Morrow would have much rather avoided her. Still, Morrow put on a smile and told Lean she was glad to see her too. Morrow was totally bracing for some drama, but Lean actually surprised her. The girl just turned around and left. Morrow stared after her, completely surprised and not sure how to feel about what her former friend just did. Morrow realized that Lean had changed. There was no warmth left, like she wasn't expecting anything from Morrow anymore. Morrow had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, it didn't feel as good as she thought it would. She decided to just forget about it because thinking too much would just hurt, and she needed to keep her distance from Lean anyway. Meanwhile, Morrow got mobbed by a bunch of lords and ladies hungry for gossip, who were super interested in why she hadn't been out of the house lately. Marel figured just as she thought. That was the question on everyone's mind. A ton of rumors had started after she disappeared, but nobody had figured out the truth. Marel thought that this society thought it was weird that she wasn't causing trouble, and she was so tired of that attitude. Marel was trying to figure out how to explain things, but then Ryan and his nonstop talking unexpectedly helped her out. So Marel just told everyone that a lot had happened, but at least she'd managed to clear up the misunderstanding with Ryan. Maro said she had sorted things out with Ryan about those rumors that she was chasing him because of some unrequited crush, and she complained that it's so hard to be misunderstood by everyone. Asked if she and Ryan were on the outs, and yeah, she had to admit they were. Maro explained that Ryan thought she was jealous of Leuan, but honestly that was never the issue. And Ryan finally owned up to it. Maro added that she genuinely wished Leuan and Ryan the best. After that, everyone's focus totally shifted to how she and Darcy knew each other. Maro just said Darcy had helped her a ton, just like he'd helped the entire country, and then she took a sip of champagne. I mean, Darcy had seriously done way too much for this country while the Emperor just took all the credit for his wins. She was really hoping that eventually the world would see who the real hero was. Maro went on about how Darcy was crazy competent at everything, and she couldn't help but gush about what an honor it was to serve a prince like him. Right then, Maro decided it was the perfect time and had her gifts for Darcy brought out. Her assistant made a point to say that the box of arcanium got there in one piece. The whole hall started whispering, and Maro just smiled and confirmed that, yep, she was totally giving Darcy the arcanium stones. After that, literally everyone swarmed Maro, trying to invite her to tea, dinner, you name it. Maro just kept a polite smile on and asked them to form a line. She was pulled out of all the noise around her when she spotted Ryan and Leuan a little ways down the hall. Maro figured Ryan and Leuan would be attached at the hip, but Leuan surprised her again. It was super obvious she had zero plans to stick around with Ryan. He tried to say something to her, but Leuan just turned her back and ditched him. Maro had no clue what could have gone down between them because they were always together at these things. Maro just closed her eyes for a sec, thinking it was so not her business, and she shouldn't even get hung up on them. Just then the priest announced that it was time to start the crown prince's coronation. Maro was like, finally. This moment was so overdue for Darcy. She watched with so much pride as Darcy made his way to the throne. She knew in her gut that he deserved to wear that crown. After being stuck in the shadows for way too long, Darcy was finally getting the official recognition of his real status. The Emperor rose from his throne and announced he'd brought everyone here to celebrate the birth of a new prince. He walked over to Darcy and said that he'd thought about it a lot and decided a second prince would be like the perfect motivation for Ryan's growth. Then the Emperor put the crown on Darcy's head, telling him that just like he wanted, he was a prince now. After that, the Emperor just turned and went back to his throne, and Darcy immediately took the crown off. Darcy started spinning it on his finger, saying with this smirk that his new title could be motivation for more than just Ryan's growth, because you never know what could happen. The Emperor was totally furious at Darcy's nerve and angrily demanded how he could act like that. Darcy just kinda laughed and told the Emperor not to mind him. Maro looked over at Darcy, completely getting why he was acting this way. Darcy, still spinning the crown on his finger, caught her eye. He gave Maro this real genuine smile, his focus just on her for a second. Maro thought, wow, a smile like that could seriously charm anyone. Darcy seemed to remember his manners and thanked everyone for showing up no matter what their reasons were. He gave this soft smile and said he had big hopes for everyone there in the near future. Then his voice got kinda chilly, and he said he hoped people would make choices they wouldn't regret, adding that he was looking forward to getting to know them. Maro thought Darcy was absolutely perfect for the prince role, like he was so much better in the spotlight than hidden away. But then something totally unexpected happened that Maro could never have predicted at this ceremony. Leuan, who was standing right by Maro, started to wobble and then just collapsed, and Maro had to catch her. Maro stared totally shocked at Leuan, who was passed out in her lap. Maro was just glad she'd been able to support Leuan's head, but she couldn't figure out why the girl felt so cold. Leuan's grandfather rushed right over to them, checking on her. He begged her to open her eyes, and Kaiser knelt down beside her. Maro figured it was lucky she'd kinda gone down with Leuan, so hopefully no one would think this was her fault. Kaiser went to pick Leuan up, saying he'd get her to a doctor, but Leuan's grandfather stopped him, saying that was his granddaughter, and he would be the one to carry her. Her grandfather thanked Maro for catching Leuan and said he owed her one. Maro just said it was nothing, and for real asked what was wrong with her old friend. Her grandfather just said grimly that they had no clue what was up with Leuan. Ryan came over and asked if he could go with them. Her grandpa said okay, and they left the throne room, leaving everybody totally confused about what just went down. Darcy came over to Maro, who was still on the floor, held out his hand and asked if she was ready to get up. Maro, snapping out of her daze and realizing where she was, tried to stand up. Darcy barely had time to ask if she was okay when a sharp pain shot through her ankle. Maro was pretty sure she'd sprained it a little. Darcy just sighed and said it looked like Maro needed to get off her feet. Maro was about to call for her maid, but Darcy just scooped her up into his arms, and Maro knew exactly what kind of rumors that would start. With all the rumors already flying around, people immediately started whispering that Maro and Darcy were totally a thing. Maro's face went beet red, and she mumbled that she could have just gotten a ride. Darcy shot back that if he took her to the doctor himself, it'd be way faster. He added that it was also safer, and Marel couldn't really argue with that as he started leading her out of the hall. Kaiser caught up to them asking if he could tag along. Darcy couldn't just tell him to get lost in front of everybody, but the second they were in the hallway he was like, "Why the heck are you following us?" Kaiser said he wanted to be there for Leuan, which Darcy had already figured out. So Darcy asked if Kaiser had something he wanted to say to Marel since he was so insistent on coming. Kaiser looked down and pretty much forced himself to thank Marel for helping Leuan earlier. Darcy gave him a stone-cold glare and said that was so not what he meant. Marel, totally picking up on Darcy's vibe, quickly jumped in to cool him off, saying she didn't need anything from Kaiser. She explained that she'd given up on Kaiser a long time ago since he couldn't even deal with the fact that she had actually changed. Marel said Kaiser's ego was probably already bruised by Leuan's grandpa ignoring him, so she might as well be the bigger person and just cut the guy some slack. Kaiser didn't say anything, but inside he was steaming, thinking his pride wasn't hurt at all since it made total sense for Leuan's grandpa to follow Ryan. After that, Kaiser suddenly wondered, has Marel always been like this? Back in the day, she'd either ignore him or try to get on his good side just to get to Ryan. Kaiser was seriously confused about who the real Marel was. Kaiser thought that maybe Marel really had changed, but he decided to hold off on judging for now. Darcy led the way out into the courtyard. Marel thought it was surprisingly nice being in his arms, and then it hit her manners. She asked Darcy if he realized he was supposed to go back to the ball. Darcy just said they were almost there and that he'd already shown his face long enough at that party. Kaiser obviously recognized the road they were on and got super tense asking if they were going where he thought they were. Darcy replied, "You guessed it," which was exactly why he hadn't wanted him to come along. Marel asked, "Okay, so where are we actually going?" Darcy told her he was taking her to see Robart, the court physician. Kaiser angrily snapped that Robart should be busy treating Leuan. Darcy replied darkly that he couldn't care less about Leuan, especially since Marel got hurt because of her. Marel tried to tell Darcy that she was perfectly fine, but he just wasn't listening. Marel sighed and muttered that someone was way too eager to drag her to the royal doctor. Hearing that, Kaiser said in that case, he'd go in first so they wouldn't freak Leuan out by storming the office all at once. But before Kaiser could even open the door, a female healer appeared on the threshold. It was Robart. You could tell right away she was a doctor you could totally trust. Darcy mentioned that Robart was the one who treated him a bunch of times when he was pretending to be Kaiser. Kaiser just stood there in front of Robart, looking totally lost, and Darcy got the feeling the woman didn't have a lot of patience. After getting the lowdown from Robart, Kaiser told Darcy that Leuan hadn't been brought to her even though her attendant had stopped by. Marel thought it was super weird that Leuan wouldn't see the court physician, especially since she seemed to be in pretty bad shape. Robart, meanwhile, walked up to Darcy and greeted him, saying she was glad to finally meet him. Darcy suggested they head inside so Robart could check out Marel's leg. In the office, they had Marel sit down, and Robart warned her she'd need to lift her dress a little to examine it. The second Darcy heard that, he was like, "I think I'll wait outside." As he started to leave, Marel stopped him saying, "Dude, it's just my ankle, you can totally stay." Darcy didn't need to be told twice. Robart carefully checked Marel's leg, said it was a sprain, and mentioned it must have really hurt on the way over. Marel blushed and replied that since she didn't have to walk, she hadn't felt a thing. Robart rubbed a really strong herbal-smelling ointment on Marel's ankle. Almost instantly, Marel felt the pain from the sprain just melt away like magic. Robart said she'd pack up some herbs for Marel and find her some flats. Marel genuinely thanked Robart, telling her she was an amazing doctor. Marel stood up to test her leg and said she could for sure walk on her own now. The pain was completely gone. Darcy suggested they head back to the palace together, but Robart called out to him. Robart leaned in and asked if she could have a private word with Darcy. He asked if it was about Marel's health. Robart said no, it was about him. She then suggested he might be more comfortable talking to her alone. Darcy just said that if it was something she couldn't say in front of Marel, she should just forget it. Robart said she understood, and then she handed him a pitcher. Robart said that burning too much incense makes the air all stuffy. Then she added that she was really glad to see Darcy looking so healthy, which totally caught him off guard. Robart said that the longer you live in the palace, the more secrets you end up keeping, and that it always made her feel terrible. That's when it clicked for Darcy. Robart remembered him from when he was Kaiser's puppet, and used to come to her for treatment, hiding his face behind a mask. Robart admitted she wasn't strong enough or brave enough to stand up for Darcy back then, but she had never forgotten about him. Robart was like she seriously did everything she possibly could. As Darcy turned to leave, he shot back that he never expected anything from her in the first place. The door slammed shut behind him, and Marel could totally see he was bummed out. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her voice full of worry. Darcy just said it was kind of hilarious that Robart even remembered him. Marel then asked if he was ticked off at her. Darcy replied that since he never asked her for help, there was nothing to be ticked off about. He said he was just plain surprised Robart felt like she had to apologize. Marel figured that since Darcy had accepted the incense from Robart, it meant he wasn't really that mad at her. Suddenly, Kaiser rushed over to them saying he was so glad they were finally out. Kaiser politely asked Darcy to use his magic to find Leuan, but Darcy shot him down. Kaiser tried again, practically begging Darcy for help, saying he was totally desperate. Before Darcy could even answer, he heard someone heading right for them. Darcy realized the building next to Robart's was supposed to be empty, but he could definitely hear footsteps in there. Mara was completely lost, having no idea what Darcy was talking about because she couldn't hear a thing. Darcy grabbed Mara by the shoulders and shoved her into the bushes. Mara ducked down, hiding from view, and whispered, "What's wrong?" Darcy was like, "Not sure, but I think it's better if we're not seen." Because of that, Darcy suggested they just watch whatever was happening from the bushes. Just then, two random guys came into view carrying a box. The box was giving off this soft purple glow, which made Mara think it might be arcanium. It became super obvious when the guys almost dropped the box. Kaiser, who was also hiding in the bushes, whispered, "You think these guys are smugglers?" Darcy replied that it didn't really seem like smuggling when Grandfather Leuan stepped out of the empty building. The old man ordered them to get the arcanium inside ASAP. Darcy frowned when he spotted Ryan helping carry the box inside, thinking it was super weird they were sneaking into the annex so secretly, especially with Robart's place right next door. Darcy told Kaiser that Leuan was probably in that annex, giving the guy the go-ahead to check if he was right. And sure enough, Leuan appeared in the doorway of the annex, already looking a little healthier. Kaiser ran up to Leuan all excited and asked her how she was feeling. Kaiser asked if they'd figured out what happened to Leuan, and she just said she had totally overdone it. Leuan said she heard she'd caused a lot of trouble and she suggested they all go back to the ballroom together. Maro, peeking from the bushes, was surprised at how completely healthy Leuan looked. Marel wondered if the arcanium stones had something to do with Leuan's condition and also why her grandfather and Ryan never came back out. Darcy, deciding they'd seen enough, told Maro it was time to bounce. He said that the whole situation was nothing for Maro to worry about. "So should we head back to the palace?" Darcy asked. Marel said she wasn't really feeling a return trip, so Darcy suggested they just ditch the party. Darcy said there was still time before the ball ended, so they could totally go somewhere else. Marel asked where exactly he was planning on taking her. The guy just smiled and said they could go to his chambers. Standing at his door, Darcy apologized to Maro for the mess, explaining that he's not exactly tidy and doesn't have any servants. After that, Darcy opened the door for Maro. The girl was dying to see what it looked like inside the place where Darcy had spent almost his whole life. The room was a bit of a mess for sure, but everything had its place, which was so typically Darcy. The only thing that bugged Maro was the smell of incense. Darcy noticed she looked uncomfortable and asked if the smell was too strong for her. Maro didn't deny it, so Darcy immediately opened the window to get some fresh air in. After that, Darcy decided to show off a bit and handed her the gadget that saved him from the Emperor. Darcy said he thought Maro should be the one to name the thing. Maro called it a gun. Darcy said he liked the name because it was simple and straight to the point. He then folded his arms across his chest and suddenly announced he needed to come up with a strategy to take down Kaiser. Marel asked why he was suddenly all about strategy. Darcy explained that he needed a way of fighting that didn't involve magic. Since Kaiser had already seen the gun, he could probably build something even more dangerous. Darcy said he needed to create a weapon way more powerful than Kaiser ever could before the arcanium supply completely dried up. Mara was shocked, like the arcanium supply was running low. Darcy explained that arcanium was a super limited resource that could be gone soon, just like the mages. Maro suggested that maybe the mages' powers were fading because they weren't being used. Darcy just said maybe that was for the best. Maro's face fell when she saw his reaction, and she asked him to sit next to her. Maro looked at him seriously and said that she really wanted to meet the magicians. Darcy was surprised, asking why she'd need to when she had him. He could easily make any enchanted stuff she wanted. Marel explained that she wanted to help the magicians, maybe by starting a business with them. She said she was sure that it would help Darcy too. Maro said she believed their lives could be better, and that this could be a starting point for Darcy to find his own happiness. Maro was positive about it, especially since Darcy was a magician himself, one who was forced to turn on his own kind. Maro watched Darcy, trying to see if any of what she said actually got through to him. He was all hunched over his face, buried in his hands, so she couldn't read his reaction at all. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but he just told her not to look at him, saying he probably looked like a complete idiot right then. Maro, totally confused, said that there was no way he could ever look stupid. She noticed even his ears were turning red, and honestly, she thought it was kind of adorable. Darcy let out a sharp breath, cleared his throat, and said he guessed he had finally pulled himself together. He told her he could help her meet the mages sooner, if that's what she really wanted. He explained that only mages know where the other mages are hiding, but not even all of them can actually get to those places. Then Darcy dropped a bombshell. He was the reason the mages were able to disappear. Mara was totally shocked. She had to know how it all went down. Darcy explained it was back when he was under that spell and couldn't disobey the Emperor's commands. He was forced to hunt down countless mages, but thankfully some survived because Kaiser gave the order to spare a few specific mages he'd chosen, which totally matched up with what Maro already knew. She asked if Darcy knew why Kaiser did that, but apparently he never gave his reasons. Whatever the case, Darcy couldn't defy the Emperor then, but he figured that once he broke free from the curse, he could create a safe haven for the mages. And that's exactly why the mages ended up just disappearing. Darcy was the one who gave them sanctuary. Marel told him completely serious that what he did was incredible. But he just said darkly that he only did it out of guilt, that he never should have done all that awful stuff to begin with. But Marel argued that most people in his shoes wouldn't even feel guilty. She insisted that no matter why he did it, it was an amazing thing. She needed to know how to find the mages, and she also asked if they even knew it. Was Darcy who set up the whole sanctuary? He told her they had no idea. He said no one would trust a hideout if they knew he was behind it. Then an idea seemed to hit him. He said that if the mages thought Marel was the one who created the sanctuary, they might actually go for it, especially since she was the one who gave him the arcanium to build it with. Marel smiled, asking him why he was suddenly getting all shy and dodging the credit when he was usually so confident. Darcy shot back that he's the mages' #1 enemy, and besides, there was a good chance they wouldn't even give Marel the time of day, unless she brought something huge to the table. The mages were tight with each other for sure, but they were super wary of outsiders, especially nobles. To get past their deep-seated prejudice, Marel had to offer them something really valuable, and leaning into her reputation as a villain who used enchanted items would actually help. Marel hated the idea of playing the bad guy again, but she was willing to do it if it meant helping the mages and Darcy. Marel said she'd give it a shot and asked him to tell her where to find them. Darcy started saying he was worried she'd get hurt, but she just pressed a finger to his lips. She told him she got that he was worried, but what she really needed from him right now was for him to believe in her. Honestly, Marel was so sick of fighting people's prejudice, but she was ready to go another round. At least this time she had someone she could totally count on. He always believed in her, and that's what gave her the strength to keep going. It was because of Darcy that no matter what happened, she knew she could learn from it, and for that she was so grateful to him. She thanked him, but he didn't get why she was suddenly thanking him, and asked what he'd even done. Marel just said she was grateful for everything, telling him he was an amazing person. She promised that sooner or later she was going to tell the mages that he was the one who built their sanctuary. Darcy just sighed and said that her thinking that way was more than enough for him. Then he asked if she wanted to listen to some music, and she was surprised he even had a record player. He explained it's what he did when he was alone. He asked what she wanted to hear, but she just said that since they were in his room, he should be the one to pick the music. He agreed and put on a piano sonata that started with this mix of a major and minor chord. As Marel listened, she couldn't help but think the melody was so perfectly Darcy. Darcy didn't see the incense sticks next to Marel and rushed to move them, but she stopped him saying they smelled nice and asking him to light one. He smiled and said he didn't mind at all that she was shaking up his routine. Marel then said they could skip his incense and use the sticks Robart gave them instead. She held the jug out to him, and when their hands brushed, Darcy totally blushed again. He told her he found her hands way more interesting than any incense and asked if he could see her palms. Marel was taken aback by the random request. She had no idea what looking at her palm was supposed to do. But Darcy's smug little smile told her everything. He was just messing with her again to make her blush. She playfully called him out on it, and he just said, "Guilty as charged." Anyway, Darcy was still curious why Robart would give him a jug of incense. He tilted it, and a pendant fell out into his hand, completely catching him by surprise. Marel asked what it was, since he obviously recognized it. He told her it was an imperial treasure, an item that could protect its wearer from mind control. Marel realized that Robart must have taken a massive risk to get this to Darcy. She must have really cared. Darcy looked at the pendant and smiled, saying something like, "And to think I was so sure Robart was on Kaiser's side," handed the pendant to Marel, and said that it would be better if she kept it. Darcy said that no one would think that the pendant was Marel's, plus it would definitely look good on a girl. Looked at the pendant in her hands in confusion. She was pleased that Darcy trusted her, but she also felt a little uneasy. Darcy said the pendant would protect Marel from mind control, but it was worth remembering that Ryan was looking for this treasure. Marel replied that no one would think of searching her estate, plus she was completely confident that Darcy would not control her mind. Darcy said that in that case, Marel could have just worn the pendant under her clothes, so that people wouldn't see. Marel asked if it wouldn't have been better to hide the pendant on Darcy. Darcy replied that it would be better if Marel had the pendant, because who knows, maybe he would decide to use mind control on her. After all, Marel thought that Darcy's abilities did not frighten her at all. Whatever. Side Marel, Darcy showed he remained the man who was always ready to listen to her. It was Darcy who saw Marel as she was, and that is why this man forever took a place in the girl's heart. Darcy said that he was not joking at all. He was not sure that he would not become more cruel to the girl when he realized exactly what he felt for her. Darcy said that he did not want to do to Marel what his mother did to the Emperor, so he asked her to wear the pendant anyway. Darcy was truly afraid because he was not confident in himself. Marel sighed heavily and said that she agreed to wear the pendant. Marel explained that she agreed not because she didn't trust Darcy, but only because he asked her. After this, Marel handed Darcy the chain and asked her to help her put on the pendant. Darcy fastened the chain, after which he thoughtfully said that next to Marel he became very shy and felt afraid. Darcy said thoughtfully that he was usually not like this at all, but around Morrow he changed. Morrow felt Darcy's fingers on her neck, which made her feel embarrassed. Morrow's cheeks turned red again, and the girl thought that she was once again embarrassed over nothing. Darcy moved a little away from Morrow, and the girl thought that it was good that he did not see her face. After this, Darcy said that he had one request for the girl. Darcy said there was something he wanted to do with Morrow right now. Morrow said that Darcy could do whatever he wanted, and the girl promised to let him know if she didn't like it. Morrow blushed even more deeply, thinking that this might sound rather ambiguous. Darcy smiled and said that in that case, Morrow should not be indignant later. Darcy knelt before Morrow and said that he would like his feelings for the girl to be exclusively beautiful and respectful. Darcy said that despite his desire, his feelings were still somewhat dirty, after which Darcy tenderly kissed Morrow's hand, causing her to blush again. Morrow's heart skipped a beat, and the girl herself froze in place, clearly not wanting to push Darcy away. Darcy stroked Morrow's hand, looking at her fingers with a thoughtful smile. Darcy said that he had to let Morrow go now, because he was not sure what else he might do if he did not do it now, and wished the girl good night. That same night in the palace, Grandpa Leuan recalled that his granddaughter was not expected to live more than 15 years. His daughter fell in love with a worthless man, gave birth to Leuan, and abandoned her. The grandfather simply could not part with his only remaining family. The year Leuan turned 15, her grandfather extended her life with the help of Arcanium, but the longer the Arcanium kept her alive, the more stones were required. Grandpa Leuan thought that they needed more Arcanium, but the situation was not in their favor. Now the man was worried about the fate of his granddaughter. This excitement was noticed by Leuan, who asked if her grandfather was feeling well. Grandpa replied that he was perfectly fine, just a little surprised. When Leuan fell, Leuan felt sorry for worrying her grandfather, and she also felt sorry for causing trouble for Ryan, which is why she planned to send the man a token of her gratitude. Grandpa Leuan noted that he hadn't seen Ryan at their mansion in a long time. Leuan said that she simply didn't invite him. When asked why, Leuan said she simply needed time to reflect on herself. Grandpa noted that Leuan had no faults to worry about, but the girl replied that she had failed to stand up for her friend when he needed it. Leuan said she avoided a lot of things simply because she felt they had nothing to do with her, especially when it came to Ryan. Leuan thought that if he was kind to her, then he was kind to everyone, but this was not so. Leuan said she should have done something when people crossed the line, but she only realized it now. Leuan said she now had to face the truth. Grandpa Leuan looked proudly at his granddaughter. He really liked how she grew up. It was for her sake that he made a deal with Ryan when he came to ask if Leuan really needed more Arcanium. Ryan said that with Arcanium supplies dwindling, they would have to conserve what they had, and also gather as many stones as possible. For this reason, Ryan said that they needed to unite against the Ickle family. Ryan promised to give the AAL family one of the ET mines. It was a worthy price. This was indeed exactly what Grandpa Leuan needed at that moment, and it infuriated him since Ryan clearly knew about Leuan's problems, but instead of offering help, he used the situation to his advantage. The grandfather accepted Ryan's proposal, but thought that he would never allow him to marry his granddaughter. Meanwhile, Mara was thinking about what she needed to do first, slipping away without making anyone suspicious. Mara wasn't like the other girls. She'd already ghosted society once, so what was stopping her from doing it again? Mara walked into the store and had them pack up every single toy, figuring it was the quickest way to get the kids on her team. Marel's plan involved more than just toys, though. She was going to hook them up with actual magical items. For sure, it was all part of Mara's master plan to get the mages to trust her, but she also genuinely just wanted to make the kids happy. The thing is, magicians' kids had to stay hidden in this world, so they were missing out on all the feels that are super important when you're a kid. So Mara wanted to give them new experiences, dreams, and some hope. If the mages got good vibes from the magical stuff, it could totally help seal a contract with them. They ended up with a literal mountain of gifts for Mara, and she just stared at it, feeling so proud. Marel realized she would 100% need Darcy's help delivering all these presents, and Marel was genuinely hyped that she was finally getting her plan started. The second Marel stepped outside, people immediately started whispering that the girl must have more money than she knew what to do with. Mara figured she should probably send some of the toys to an orphanage to cover her tracks. The rumors were seriously spreading like wildfire. People were dying to know why Mara bought a crazy amount of toys. Some were even speculating that Mara was getting close to Darcy, or at least that's what one